Hi everyone, tonight, we're stepping quietly into a world long gone. A world of candlelit halls, flickering torches, heavy embroidered gowns, and strange old customs whispered from one generation to the next. Because we're going to slowly drift through the true story of what weddings were actually like in the Middle Ages. Not the fairy tales. Not the sanitized stories of princesses and knights, but the real customs, beliefs, and rituals that surrounded one of the most important events in a person's life during that time. And it might not be what you think. Now, let's begin in the year 1234, in a quiet village nestled deep in the French countryside. A place where the fields stretch endlessly beneath a sky often thick with clouds, and where the clanging of a distant blacksmith is the only rhythm that breaks the hum of wind through wheat. In this small village, a young girl, not yet 15, is preparing for her wedding. She's been promised since she was 9. Her groom is twice her age. He's the son of a local landowner, not rich, not noble, but certainly respected, and the arrangement was made between families, not lovers. In truth, she's seen him only a few times, and always from afar. But that was the way of things. In the medieval world, love had little to do with marriage. It was about land, lineage, labor, and above all, legacy. People married to secure peace between families, to gain cattle, to merge fields, to pass on names. Among nobles, it was more political, of course, and among peasants, more practical. But in both cases, romance was often a luxury, something that might come later or might never come at all. Preparation began days in advance. First, the banns would be read, an announcement made in church for 3 Sundays in a row, declaring the couple's intention to marry, allowing anyone with objections to step forward. And these objections weren't just for dramatic effect, they mattered. If someone knew the bride and groom were related within the prohibited degrees, or if the groom had a secret wife in another village, the wedding could be called off. In an age without paperwork or photographs, the spoken word held power. Once the banns were read, the village buzzed into motion. Women would gather in the bride's home to prepare her garments. She rarely owned more than a dress or two, and for this occasion, she might wear a slightly finer one, maybe dyed with local plants, often yellow or blue or green depending on what was available, and stitched with small beads or bits of lace, though lace was expensive, and most likely it was passed down or borrowed. There was no traditional white gown. That idea wouldn't take hold until centuries later. Instead, brides wore their best dress, whatever color it was, and often it was the same dress they would wear to church, to market, to feasts. A crown of flowers might rest on her head, wildflowers gathered that morning, woven into a halo, a symbol of purity, of maidenhood, of fleeting youth. In her small house, there would be noise and warmth and activity. Women preparing oatcakes, sweetened with a bit of honey if it was available, or flavored with herbs. A pot of stew would bubble over the hearth, root vegetables mostly, maybe a bit of rabbit if one had been caught, or just onions and leeks simmered until soft. Bread would be baked, coarse, brown, dense with grain, and if the family was lucky, a little cheese, though it would be pungent and hard, nothing like what we know today. Outside, the village square would be swept clean, decorations hung, herbs scattered to cover the smell of mud and animals. Children would chase one another through the streets, excited by the promise of music and food. The men, meanwhile, would gather at the tavern, drinking ale, preparing a crude canopy of branches and cloth under which the wedding could be blessed. The church, if the village had one, would be small, cold, and dim. Stone walls covered in moss, wooden pews, a narrow altar. If there was no church, the ceremony would often be held outside its doors, for many weddings were not grand affairs held within cathedrals, but humble unions performed quickly and without pomp. There was no exchange of rings, unless the family was wealthy. Rings were rare and most people never owned one. Instead, the groom might present a symbolic gift, a coin, a belt, or even a kiss, as a token of his intent. The priest, if present, would say a blessing, recite a few lines from scripture, and the couple would say their vows aloud, in the presence of witnesses. These vows were not always standardized. They varied by region, by priest, by language. Some were spoken in Latin, others in the local tongue. But they all followed the same sacred structure, a promise before God to remain together. And just like that, they were married. But the wedding was not over. Not by a long shot. In many villages, the celebration continued for hours, sometimes days, depending on how much food and drink had been prepared. The bride and groom would walk through the streets, accompanied by music, flutes, drums, pipes, and laughter. Dances would erupt in the fields, circular, rhythmic, repetitive, meant to last until exhaustion. There was no choreography, just movement, just joy, just bodies spinning in time with the heartbeat of the earth. Food was served from large wooden bowls, stews ladled out to all, bread torn and shared, ale poured into clay mugs and passed around. Drinking was communal, boisterous, sometimes wild. People sang songs, not just love songs, but bawdy, humorous ballads, stories of knights and fools, saints and sinners. Children danced, old men told tales, and the fire, if it was night, would burn tall and hot at the center of it all. Some traditions were more peculiar. In parts of Europe, there was the ritual of the bedding, a controversial and deeply symbolic act, where the couple would be led to their bedchamber, sometimes with a crowd of friends and family watching or even helping them undress. It was meant to ensure the marriage was consummated, to mark the union as valid in the eyes of the church. In some cases, they were even blessed in bed. Of course, not every village followed this. Many found it shameful or unnecessary, but the idea persisted for centuries. As the night wore on, the music slowed, the laughter faded, and guests would drift home, through fields lit by moonlight. The newlyweds, now truly bound, would remain behind, their world forever changed. But what if we look beyond the village, to the castles, to the manors, to the noble courts, where weddings were something else entirely? That's where we're headed next. Beyond the quiet fields and muddy roads of the peasant village, past the forests thick with wolves and superstition, there rose the walls of stone, great halls, fortified manors, and towering castles built to withstand siege and time alike. And within these walls lived another kind of world entirely, where marriage was not simply a rite of passage, but a tool of strategy, a performance of power, and a ritual drenched in symbolism, wealth, and calculation. Among the nobility, marriage was rarely, if ever, a personal choice. It was a decision made between fathers, sometimes mothers, often even kings or popes. Children of noble birth were betrothed not when they came of age, but sometimes in infancy, sometimes at birth, and their fates were signed, sealed, and locked away in parchment years before they could even understand what marriage meant. A 6-year-old girl could be promised to a 10-year-old boy across the sea, not because they loved one another, but because their union might prevent a war, merge two lands, or secure an alliance. And so, when the time came, often once the bride reached 12 or 14, and the groom was somewhat older, the preparations would begin. Unlike the villagers, who had only days or weeks to prepare, noble weddings could take months to plan, and required entire staffs of servants, scribes, priests, tailors, and cooks to bring them into being. The clothing alone was a spectacle. The bride might wear a gown of silk, a fabric imported across long trade routes, dyed rich colors like crimson, violet, or deep blue, colors that spoke of wealth, power, and divine favor. Her sleeves could be lined with ermine or trimmed with pearls, her shoes dyed with rare plant dyes, her veil stitched by hand over weeks by the nimble fingers of quiet women in candlelit rooms. Her hair would be washed in scented water, combed smooth with ivory-handled brushes, braided with ribbons or tiny golden rings. If her family was truly wealthy, a jeweled circlet, not a crown but close, would rest atop her head. The groom, too, would be dressed in layers of brocade, wool, velvet, and fur, his family crest stitched over his chest, his belt fastened with a silver buckle, his boots polished and creased. He might carry a ceremonial sword, not for battle but for display, a symbol of his role as protector and provider. His hands would be perfumed, his beard trimmed, his posture practiced. But beyond the garments, it was the ceremony and feast that turned noble weddings into something closer to theater than ritual. Invitations, if they existed, would be sent by messenger, carried on horseback across muddy roads, across rivers and borders, to summon the invited lords, ladies, bishops, and knights. The guest list could include dozens or even hundreds, depending on the political weight of the families involved. When the day arrived, the church would be lavishly decorated. Tapestries hung from the walls, altars covered in linen embroidered with gold thread, candles flickered in tall iron stands, and the air, thick with incense, rose oil and expectation, would shimmer with the faint hum of anticipation. A noble wedding was not just a family affair. It was a political signal, a public moment, a declaration of alliance that could shape the fate of entire regions. The couple would meet at the altar, though sometimes they had never met before that very moment, and the ceremony, conducted by a bishop or archbishop, would be more elaborate than the simple peasant rites. Latin verses, long prayers, multiple blessings, the sign of the cross drawn again and again. A ring might be exchanged, usually plain gold, but sometimes set with stones or engraved, and vows spoken in a practiced rhythm, memorized days before. And while the church sanctified the union, it was the feasting that celebrated it. And what a feast it would be! Great tables made of oak and draped in heavy cloths would be arranged in the great hall of the castle or manor. Fires would roar in stone hearths, casting shadows across carved walls and high ceilings. The air would fill with the scent of roasting meat, boar, venison, goose, lamb, served with sauces made from wine, vinegar, dried fruits, and spices imported at high cost from the east. There would be pies filled with pigeons or eels, trenchers of stale bread soaked in broth, platters of dried figs and nuts, bowls of pottage thick with barley or beans, and wheels of strong cheese brought from distant estates. And the desserts, sweetened with honey or rare sugar, might include fruit tarts, spiced custards, or marzipan molded into shapes. Swans, castles, flowers, even mythical creatures. Ale flowed freely, but so did mead and wine, and the more wine consumed, the louder the laughter, the looser the tongues, and the more raucous the entertainment. Minstrels played lutes and flutes, tambourines and drums. Dancers spun in the firelight. Jugglers, jesters, and acrobats performed between courses. Storytellers recited ballads, tales of great knights and doomed lovers, of dragons slain and maidens rescued. In some weddings, entire plays were performed, small dramas acted out on makeshift stages, telling stories that mirrored the couple's own. Arranged unions that grew into love, or love that defied the odds. And the guests, dressed in their finest, clapped, drank, laughed, and whispered. Alliances were forged at these tables. Secrets traded over goblets. Old grievances buried beneath the roar of celebration. Behind the scenes, servants darted through corridors, replenishing platters, pouring drinks, guiding confused guests, cleaning up messes. They were invisible and everywhere. Toward the end of the feast, another ritual unfolded, the bedding. Even more elaborate among nobles than among peasants, it was both symbolic and, at times, deeply uncomfortable. The bride and groom would be escorted, sometimes by an entire procession, to their bedchamber, a room specially prepared with flowers, sheets scented with herbs, and a large feather-stuffed mattress. Their clothes might be ceremonially removed by attendants of the same gender, and then, depending on the custom of the land and the will of the family, they might be left alone, or, in more awkward cases, observed until the marriage was considered fully consummated. In some courts, a token, a blood-stained sheet, a sign of virginity was expected as proof. In others, a prayer was said and the door shut. But the message was clear. The union was not merely social or spiritual, but physical, and that physical bond was essential to the inheritance of land, title, and power. When morning came, the couple would rise not just as husband and wife, but as a new household, a new link in the great chain of medieval lineage, ready to fulfill their roles, she to bear children and manage the household, he to fight, govern, and secure the legacy. But even as the noble couple took their place in the grand tapestry of history, weddings elsewhere were happening too, among merchants, artisans, and even outlaws. Next, let's walk away from the castle walls and into the bustling medieval towns, where a different kind of wedding was unfolding. Far from the rural quiet of the village and the echoing stone of the noble manor, there was yet another kind of world. A world louder, busier, denser. The medieval town, where cobbled streets twisted like veins through markets, workshops, bakeries, and guild halls, where the air always smelled of sweat and smoke and bread baking in clay ovens, and where weddings were neither humble nor regal, but something in between. Bustling, practical, but still touched with celebration, ritual, and meaning. It is here, amid the clamor of the market square, that we find a young couple preparing for their marriage, the daughter of a wool merchant and the son of a carpenter. Their families are not rich, but they are comfortable. Their union is not one born of romantic love, but neither is it forced. They've known each other since childhood, exchanged glances during feast days, spoken softly behind linen stalls and over barrels of salted fish. Their fathers struck the deal months ago, agreeing to a fair dowry and mutual gain. But there is fondness here, and that is more than many in this time can say. For urban dwellers, especially the growing middle class of merchants and craftsmen, marriage was often a mix of business and affection. Unlike peasants bound by labor or nobles by blood, townspeople had a little more freedom to choose, and yet the social web of the city was dense. One's reputation mattered. The guilds watched. The parish took note. A poorly made match could stain a family's name or cause tension among trade partners, so the stakes were always present. Preparations began not with banners or gowns, but with contracts. In the back room of the wool merchant's house, a clerk was summoned, a man with ink-stained fingers and a careful tone, who wrote, line by line, the formal agreement between the two families. The size of the dowry was specified, perhaps 20 silver coins, 2 bolts of good wool, and the promise of an apprentice's position in the carpentry guild. In return, the groom pledged a steady household, a place in his father's workshop, and protection for the bride. Once written, the contract was signed, sealed, and sometimes witnessed by the local priest or notary. Only then could the banns be read, often from the pulpit of a church nestled between crowded tenements, where soot clung to the stone and pigeons gathered in the bell tower. The priest would announce the names of the couple 3 Sundays in a row, just as in the countryside, and the community would murmur, gossip, or quietly approve. The bride's dress was simpler than a noble's but finer than a peasant's. She wore wool, dyed a warm red with madder root or perhaps a soft green, colors affordable but still meaningful. Her shoes were leather, stiff and handmade. Her hair was braided and covered, for modesty, with a wimple or veil. The groom wore a tunic of good cloth, belted at the waist, and a new pair of hose, freshly dyed and slightly itchy. The ceremony took place not inside a church, but just outside its door. A tradition still followed in towns, symbolic of the couple's transition from secular to sacred, from 2 individuals to a single household. A small group of witnesses gathered, family, fellow guild members, neighbors, while the priest stood beneath the stone archway, his hands raised in blessing. Vows were spoken aloud, hands clasped together, a coin exchanged, or in some cases a token ring. Then came the kiss, not the passionate kiss of modern romance, but a solemn public gesture of sealing the union. And with that, the marriage was made, not in silence, but in the murmurs of the watching crowd, the ringing of the distant bell, the clatter of hooves in a nearby alley, and the barking of a stray dog that circled the gathering looking for scraps. But the heart of a city wedding was not the ceremony. It was the feast. Unlike peasants who shared stews in open fields, or nobles who dined on golden platters, the townsfolk celebrated in long timber halls, often rented from the local guild or hosted in a relative's home. Furniture would be pushed aside, trestle tables assembled, and the room hung with cloth and herbs to soften the smell of wax and humanity. The food was hearty and plentiful. Roasted chickens or ducks, if the family could afford them, or large meat pies stuffed with pork, eggs, and dried fruits. Spiced wine made with cloves and cinnamon warmed in pots, served in ceramic jugs. Breads were sliced thick and spread with soft cheese or garlic paste. There might be pickled vegetables, dried sausages, fish salted and fried, and bowls of almonds or dates passed around between courses. Musicians were often hired, usually 2 or 3, playing lutes, bagpipes, or the vielle, a kind of medieval fiddle. Their tunes filled the air between bites, creating rhythm for the celebration. Guests clapped in time, sometimes danced in pairs, and occasionally sang, though few could carry a tune. Children darted under tables, stealing morsels and giggling. Elders drank slowly, remembering their own weddings, long past. Toasts were made not just to the couple but to the families, to the guilds, to God. Short speeches delivered in low voices, each followed by another round of wine. Gifts were given too, often practical things. A new cloak, a cooking pot, a bundle of firewood, or even a joint payment toward the couple's rent. It was not about extravagance, but support. When the sun dipped below the rooftops and shadows lengthened through the narrow streets, the crowd would thin. The bride and groom would be quietly led to their new home, sometimes just a room above the workshop, where a small fire had already been lit, the bed prepared, and a loaf of bread broken across the threshold as a sign of fertility and plenty. No fanfare, no crowd, just a new life beginning behind a wooden door. Yet even in the towns, variations abounded. In the Jewish quarter, marriage customs followed their own ancient traditions. In merchant families, foreign spices and silks adorned the feast table. In times of plague or famine, weddings were whispered and rushed. And during holy days, they were delayed entirely. But all of them, from the village to the castle to the cobbled streets, shared the same foundation. A promise, a joining, a moment when two people, whether strangers or friends, whether wealthy or poor, were bound together in a world that offered few guarantees. And still, there were more. What of weddings during war, during plague, during times of fear, or hunger, or silence? How did love survive in the shadow of death? Let's step into those stories next. There were times, of course, when the music stopped. Not all weddings happened in seasons of warmth, peace, and bounty. Some took place under skies that hung heavy with ash or rain, beneath the pall of fear that swept through towns and villages alike. For as long as there had been love, there had also been death, and during the long, unrelenting crises of the Middle Ages, when plague emptied cities, when armies trampled fields, when famine withered crops and bellies alike, weddings did not disappear. They simply changed. Let us begin in a time of sickness. It is the year 1349, and the Black Death has already made its slow, agonizing crawl across much of Europe. In the city of Florence, once vibrant with trade, art, and song, the streets lie nearly silent now. The bells that toll are not wedding bells, but funeral chimes. The air smells of lye, of rotting wood, of bodies hastily buried beneath thin layers of lime and earth. And yet, amidst this, two people still alive, still breathing, still clinging to the belief that life must go on, are to be wed. Their wedding does not involve priests, for most of the clergy are dead or dying. Their families are small, those who remain. No feast is planned, no music plays, and yet, beneath the eaves of an abandoned chapel, they hold hands and speak quiet vows, not in Latin, not even in the polished tongue of ceremony, but in trembling whispers of the vernacular. The bride wears black, not as a statement, but because cloth is scarce and mourning is the only fashion left. The groom has sores on his hands. He hides them, and though there are no guests, no flowers, no toasts, something solemn binds them, not just to each other, but to the future. In a time when tomorrow is no longer promised, to marry is to declare hope, to resist despair, to say, we will love even now. These plague weddings were rare but not unknown. Sometimes they were held in haste. A young man, infected, racing to marry so his bride might inherit what little he had before death claimed him. Sometimes they were acts of defiance or superstition, a belief that a sacred bond might ward off the sickness, that divine favor might be bought through ritual. And in other cases, marriages happened after the wave passed, among survivors who had seen enough of grief to crave the warmth of another's hand in the dark. But plague was not the only shadow. Famine, too, reshaped the wedding. Picture now a countryside deep in the grip of failed harvests. The years 1315 to 1317, the great famine that starved northern Europe. The rains would not stop. The fields drowned. The grain rotted. And across England, France, and the German principalities, people ate bark, grass, and even things darker. Trade slowed. Animals died. Parents outlived children. And weddings, well, they became quiet, cautious affairs if they happened at all. In such times, a marriage was not a celebration, it was a strategy for survival. Two households joining meant shared food stores, an extra pair of hands to gather fuel, another body to tend goats or spin wool. Dowries shrank. Contracts were verbal, not written. The feast might be a crust of bread and a pot of weak soup. Onions boiled until their scent faded to air. Yet still, couples came together, bound by more than tradition. In these weddings, there was a different kind of vow. Not just to love and honor, but to endure, to scrape through winter, to wake together even when the stomach was empty. And then there was war. Weddings during wartime carried another weight entirely. In the late 12th century, during the height of the Crusades, men rode off to distant lands in the name of God and glory, often leaving behind new wives. Marriages arranged days before departure, rushed ceremonies held in castle courtyards or chapel ruins, the groom in armor, the bride clinging to his mailed sleeve. There was no time for feast or dance. The marriage was sealed with a prayer, a kiss, and the gift of a keepsake, a ring, a locket, a handkerchief stitched with the initials of both names. These war-bound weddings were acts of preservation. A nobleman needed heirs, even if he did not return. A peasant needed someone to tend his fields while he marched with the Lord's banner. And women left behind held entire estates, workshops, and households on their shoulders, all in the name of a husband who might never come back. Sometimes soldiers married in foreign lands. A French knight might take a Greek bride. A crusader might marry a widow in Jerusalem, not out of love, but necessity, to gain protection, to claim land, to form alliances across cultures. These unions were often uneasy, shaped by language barriers and suspicion. But even then, in strange cities under strange skies, two people stood side by side and said yes to one another. Even civil wars within Europe, like the War of the Roses or the 100 Years' War, interrupted weddings with fire and steel. Guests were ambushed, church towers collapsed, feast tables were overturned, and new brides were widowed by nightfall. And yet, in the lull between battles, there was always someone ready to kneel and whisper a vow, because to marry was to say, "We believe there will be peace again." And so, weddings did not stop, even when the world burned. There's something haunting in that, in the persistence of the ritual, the quiet strength of it. Through pestilence, hunger, and war, people still came together, still stood before God, family, or no one at all and made promises. Sometimes those marriages lasted only days, sometimes a lifetime, but each one left a trace, in records, in memory, in lineage. And not all weddings were between the young. What of those who married later in life? Widows, monks released from vows, soldiers come home broken. What did love or duty or loneliness look like for them? Let's move forward and visit the second weddings, the late marriages, and the union society whispered about. Not every marriage in the Middle Ages began with youth and fresh faces. Some unions were quiet affairs formed in the late chapters of life, after the first love had gone, after children had grown, after war, illness, or time had thinned the hair and stiffened the knees. And though these weddings rarely appear in the grand songs or illuminated manuscripts, they were, in truth, far more common than we imagine, simple, sober, and quietly necessary. Let us picture now a stone cottage near the edge of a coastal village, where the wind always seems to carry salt, and gulls cry above the mossy thatched rooftops. Inside that cottage lives a woman named Elsbeth, 50 years old, a widow for nearly a decade. Her husband, a fisherman, drowned in a storm so many winters ago that the pain has settled into something like acceptance. Her children are grown, married, gone to cities or new villages. And though she is respected and not poor, the days have grown longer, quieter, the nights colder. Then comes a knock. A man she once knew in youth, Bertram, a cooper by trade, also widowed, has returned to the village. His hands are still strong, though his shoulders now ache with each barrel he lifts. He speaks softly, with the humility of a man who has built and lost and built again. And over the course of months, not days, not hours, the two begin to visit, to talk, to remember. No one calls it courting. There's something gentler than that. A warmth that returns slowly, like spring after a long frost. When they decide to marry, it is not with the fanfare of younger couples. There are no dancing children, no veils of wildflowers. The ceremony is held inside, during a cold afternoon, with only a priest, a neighbor, and a loaf of bread on the table as witness. Their vows are brief. Their hands, lined with time, clasp tightly, and their kiss is not filled with promise, but with peace. In the weeks after, they merge households, combining tools, jars of pickled vegetables, scraps of linen, and memories. Late marriages like this were not rare, especially among widows. Death came early and often in the Middle Ages, and few passed through life untouched by it. To marry again, once grief had softened, was a way of reclaiming rhythm. It was not shameful. On the contrary, it was often seen as wise. Two people who understood loss choosing to share what years remained. And yet, it carried different rules. Widows were often in a better financial position than unmarried girls. They could inherit land, manage property, run businesses, and in many towns they wielded quiet power. Some remarried for companionship, others for protection, still others for business. A woman who brewed ale might marry a man who owned barrels. A cloth merchant might wed a weaver. These were unions of practicality, of mutual need, but they were not without affection. In fact, they were often more balanced than youthful marriages, which were bound by pressure and custom. And then there were the marriages that caused whispers, the ones not written about in glowing terms or celebrated with processions. Think now of a former monk, a man who, for 20 years, lived behind monastery walls, copying scripture, ringing bells, reciting prayers by candlelight. But something changed. A reform swept through the church. Or perhaps he simply lost his faith or found a different one. Maybe he was cast out. Maybe he left by choice. Either way, he emerged, confused, unsure, but certain of one thing. He no longer wished to live alone. In the town he settled in, he met a woman, a healer, known for her herbs and her quiet wisdom. She was not beautiful by the standards of courtly love. Her face was weathered, her eyes sharp, but there was something grounding in her presence. They began to walk together along the edge of the woods, speaking of things not taught in church, of roots and remedies, of birdsong and memory. When they married, it was not done publicly. No church welcomed it. No banner was raised. But still, it happened. Such marriages were controversial. A man of the cloth taking a wife was seen by some as heresy, by others as liberation. Laws varied. Some places allowed it quietly, others punished it. But even under threat, people married. Love or need or simple longing often proved stronger than doctrine. And these couples lived in the margins, raising children, growing vegetables, tending goats, quietly rewriting the rules of their own small world. There were other kinds of frowned-upon unions, too. Cousins marrying for lack of options. Poor men wedding richer widows. Foreigners settling in strange towns and taking local brides. Once, in a record kept in a Flemish abbey, there is mention of a woman who married a man believed to be a leper, though he was not, in truth, and the town shunned them for years, despite his hands being calloused, not rotting. These weddings may not have had blessings or approval, but they had resilience. Even among the wealthy, strange unions formed in the later years of life. A baron, widowed and without heirs, might take a second wife half his age, not for romance but for a son. A noblewoman, no longer fertile, might marry a younger cousin to keep land in the family. The church frowned on many such arrangements, but loopholes abounded. Papal dispensation could be bought, a bribe offered, a vow reworded. These late and difficult marriages were not exceptions. They were woven deeply into the medieval fabric. Life was not stable nor long, and most people had to navigate shifting terrain, where death, politics, hunger, and chance dictated whom they married, when and why. Still, across these strange and quiet unions, one thing remained constant: the ceremony itself, however simple or grand, the holding of hands, the promise of care, the merging of lives. It didn't matter if it was spoken beneath cathedral arches or beside a muddy riverbank. It mattered that it was spoken. But what of the rituals themselves? The symbols, the charms, the superstitions, the hidden layers of belief beneath the ceremony? In the next part of our journey, we'll step into those mysteries, the forgotten traditions, the whispered blessings, and the strange little objects that brides once carried beneath their sleeves. Though the ceremony itself often occurred in the open air, the feast that followed was the true heart of a medieval wedding, and it was not merely a dinner. It was an all-consuming spectacle that could last for hours, even days, depending on the wealth of the family. Let us step into the great hall of a 14th-century manor or castle, where banners of the family crest hang from wooden rafters, candles flicker along stone walls, and long wooden tables stretch endlessly, groaning under the weight of roasted meats, thick breads, and steaming pottage. At the head table, the bride and groom would sit in a place of honor, elevated slightly above the guests. Their table might be covered in a white linen cloth, a subtle symbol of purity and status, and decorated with herbs like rosemary and bay, believed to ward off evil spirits and promote fidelity. Before them might rest gilded trenchers made of bread or wood, goblets of pewter or even silver if they were noble-born, and in front of them, the first of many courses. Perhaps a roasted swan or peacock, its feathers carefully sewn back onto its body after cooking for presentation, the beak lacquered and the eyes replaced with polished gems or beads. These dishes weren't meant to be merely eaten, they were designed to impress. The first bites were taken only after a formal blessing, which would be performed by a local priest or sometimes a high-ranking church official. The words might invoke the Holy Trinity, speak of union, sacrifice, and divine order, and they were followed by a symbolic sip of wine. The couple would often drink from the same cup, a gesture meant to symbolize their unity and shared fate. Guests, meanwhile, were expected to bring gifts, but not wrapped as we think of today. Gifts often took the form of goods. Bolts of cloth, livestock, finely crafted tools, or coins. Sometimes these gifts were practical. A goose for the hearth, a barrel of salted fish, or a stack of firewood. And these offerings were not simply polite gestures. They were public affirmations of loyalty and alliance. To arrive empty-handed could be interpreted as a slight, especially in smaller communities where memory stretched long and grudges longer. As the feast progressed, music filled the hall. Minstrels and jongleur hired for the occasion would play lutes, rebecks, or shawms, while others performed comic acts, recited epic poems, or juggled in the corner. If the family was noble or exceptionally wealthy, they might have hired a troupe of traveling performers, or even a bear-baiter or fire-breather. The noise was a mix of laughter, the scraping of trenchers, clinking of goblets, and the low murmur of private conversations and flirtations. Yes, flirtations. For weddings were not just celebrations of a single union, but opportunities for new matches to begin forming. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Feasts could sometimes descend into chaos. Ale and mead flowed freely, and with drunkenness came spilled drinks, shouted boasts, occasional duels of pride, and once even the lighting of a feast table in accidental flames when a drunk knight tried to impress a young lady by juggling torch sticks. It's recorded in one Yorkshire manor that a guest took offense to the seating arrangement and challenged the groom's uncle to a duel, not with swords, but with poultry. The two flung roast chickens at one another until they were forcibly separated. After the food came the dancing, which wasn't the refined ballroom sort we picture from later centuries. Medieval dancing was communal and energetic. Men and women formed circles or lines, linked arms, and stepped to rhythms that varied by region. Some dances told stories, others mimicked courtship rituals or battles. A popular dance among peasants was the carol, a round dance often performed outdoors, while nobles might engage in the stampy, a more structured, foot-driven dance. Clothing, too, played a part in the spectacle. Brides wore dresses not necessarily white, but often of rich hues like deep green, red, or blue, depending on what dyes were available or what colors signified fertility or fortune in their region. The richer the fabric, velvet, silk, brocade, the higher the status. Their hair was sometimes worn loose as a symbol of virginity, crowned with a wreath of flowers, or in noble cases, a circlet of gold. Grooms wore their best tunic, often new, with embroidered symbols of their house. In noble ceremonies, a knight might pin a family crest or gift a sword to the groom in the symbolic act of entrusting him with responsibility. By late night, the hall would smell of wax, sweat, spilled ale, and roasted meat, but the joy was tangible, pulsing through every song and every stomped foot. Children would be asleep under benches or curled against the skirts of their mothers. The elderly watched, nodding, some whispering prayers, some reminiscing about their own wedding day long past. And above it all, the bride and groom were expected to smile, to greet each guest, and to represent the union of not just two people but of families, properties, sometimes even political interests. But what of the bedding ceremony? Ah yes, in many parts of medieval Europe, this strange and now forgotten tradition followed the feast. It was not a private affair. In fact, it was alarmingly public. After the last toast was raised and the final dance played, the newlyweds would be escorted to the bedchamber by a lively procession of guests. In some traditions, they would be serenaded with bawdy songs. In others, villagers would bang pots and pans or set off primitive firecrackers to ward off evil spirits and mark the moment. Once inside the chamber, often still within the manor or in a side room of the hall, the couple would be placed into the marital bed, sometimes by their relatives, who would tuck them in and even sprinkle them with holy water. Priests occasionally gave blessings right there at the bedside. And yes, it was customary in certain regions for witnesses to remain nearby, or even in the room to confirm consummation had occurred. While that sounds unimaginable today, it was seen as a guarantee of the marriage's validity and a protection for both families' honor, especially in arranged marriages. Sometimes tokens, such as bloodied sheets, were presented the next morning as proof, particularly in noble households where inheritance or legitimacy might one day be disputed. Yet not all such ceremonies were invasive. In many cases, the couple was left alone, the door shut, the world fading behind candlelit walls. The laughter continued in the hall, but for the couple, a quiet settled in. Two strangers, perhaps barely acquainted, now bound for life, learning each other's faces in the flickering dark. And with morning came a new chapter. As the sun began its slow descent behind the treetops, casting long amber shadows across the fields, the rhythm of the festivities subtly shifted. The laughter, once raucous and uncontained, mellowed into something softer, more sentimental, as if the very air had grown heavy with the weight of memory and meaning. This was the hour of storytelling, a time-honored tradition at medieval weddings where the oldest among them, grandfathers with war-worn hands, grandmothers whose eyes had seen plagues and peacetimes, would step forward to speak of the past. Not just any past, but the lineage of love, marriages of generations long gone, of battles fought for the right to wed, of dowries paid in goats and oaths sworn in rain-soaked chapels. The younger guests would huddle closer, seated on wooden benches or nestled into the soft moss by the firelight, their faces illuminated by both flame and fascination. Here, stories weren't merely entertainment. They were instruction, myth, and cautionary tale, all woven into a single breath. A tale might begin with a nobleman who fell for a baker's daughter and had to disguise himself as a commoner for 7 months just to court her without scandal. Another might recount the tragedy of a union blessed with all the riches of gold but none of the warmth of love, ending in bitterness and exile. These were not fairy tales, polished and bright. They were ragged and raw, full of humanity's imperfections and hopes. And yet, the stories weren't the only reason for this sacred twilight hour. Something almost imperceptible began to stir among the guests, the unspoken rituals of courtship. Just as the bride and groom had completed their ceremony, so too did this moment open a subtle door for others to begin their own dances of potential. A lingering glance across the circle, a shared cup of mead, a compliment murmured too quietly for others to hear, all were seeds being sown. It wasn't uncommon for a wedding to plant the beginnings of another, months or years down the road, and everyone knew it. That's why the clothing mattered so much. The reds and blues and golds were not just for show. They were symbols of vitality, strength, and readiness. A woman might lace her bodice a little tighter, or let her sleeves hang a little longer, hinting at mystery and charm, while a young man might shine his boots before arriving and comb his hair thrice for good luck. The music began again, this time slower, almost haunting in its simplicity, played by a trio of minstrels whose instruments were worn with age and affection. The hurdy-gurdy droned with a low, comforting hum, while the recorder added wisps of melody that floated like mist above the heads of the listeners. It was music not for dancing, but for dreaming, and as it drifted through the air, couples began to sway without thinking, their movements unpracticed and genuine, more like the motion of leaves in a gentle breeze than rehearsed steps. The fire crackled, the moon rose, and for a time, it was as though the harshness of medieval life had been held at bay by the sheer force of joy and togetherness. But not everything was softness and shadow. Just beyond the reach of the firelight, in the kitchens and behind the barns, the laborers continued their tireless work. The women who had spent the day baking now turned their attention to preserving leftovers, wrapping them in cloth or burying them in cool earth to ensure that no food went to waste. Servants, some hired for the day and some tied to the estate, moved quickly to collect used plates, sweep spilled ale from the packed earth floor, and tend to the still-burning ovens. Their work rarely paused, and though they rarely received the recognition granted to the bride and groom, their role was just as vital. In truth, many of them took pride in their craft. A well-executed wedding could elevate a cook's status, or earn a stable boy a recommendation to serve a noble house. Meanwhile, away from the warmth of the hearth and the clamor of laughter, the local priest remained seated quietly at the edge of the gathering. His presence was a necessary one, not just for the ceremony itself, but for the many subtle judgments that would be made in its aftermath. He was there to ensure no blasphemies were spoken, no vows broken in jest, no scandal allowed to fester. Marriage, after all, was not merely a personal bond. It was a covenant with the church and through the church with God. It was the priest who would later inscribe the couple's names in the parish record, noting not just their union, but their families, the witnesses, and the size of the feast. These details mattered, for they would be read generations later, consulted during land disputes, dowry negotiations, or questions of legitimacy. Children, too young to understand the weight of these moments, had long since collapsed into heaps of wool and straw, their small bodies sprawled beneath benches or wrapped in shawls near the fire. Their dreams would be filled with snippets of the day, dancing feet, shimmering cloth, the sweetness of honey cakes, and the dizzying whirl of music. And perhaps, in some far-off future, they would recount these very memories at another wedding, when they too were old and wise and full of stories. As the night deepened and the stars sharpened into clarity overhead, a strange hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't solemnity, exactly, nor was it fatigue alone. It was something older, deeper. A recognition that this day, this wedding, would pass into memory, carried forward not just in the minds of those present, but in the very fabric of the community. The bride and groom would wake tomorrow no longer as two, but as one, united not just by law or ritual, but by shared celebration, by the eyes that had witnessed it, by the voices that had cheered, and by the silence that now settled like a benediction over the land. Yet even as the embers cooled and the last cup was drained, not all was finished. Some weddings held secrets yet to be revealed. Rites performed in whispers, contracts sealed in darkness, and promises made that no priest would hear. But that is a tale for the next part of the night. As the wedding day progressed and the feast roared on, the hall began to transform into something more than just a place of dining. The atmosphere thickened with smoke from hearth fires and torches, the mingling aromas of roasted meats, spiced wine, and damp rushes crushed underfoot becoming almost intoxicating. Conversation flowed freely, laughter echoing across the wooden beams above, interrupted now and then by the shrill notes of a rebec or the deep twang of a lute. The minstrel's fingers danced nimbly over the strings, weaving together tunes that were half melancholy, half joyous, mirroring the strange blend of emotions that often accompanied such unions: love and duty, celebration and obligation. Seated near the head of the table, the newlyweds remained the center of attention, though by now the bride's expression had stiffened. Her hair, once perfectly braided and bejeweled, had begun to unravel slightly, stray wisps clinging to her flushed cheeks. The groom, meanwhile, had loosened his collar, leaning back with one leg crossed over the other in a manner that suggested both triumph and fatigue. They had exchanged whispered words during the meal, barely audible over the noise, but their glances often said more: nervous, tender, uncertain. After all, many couples had scarcely spoken before their wedding day, and tonight might be their first night sharing even a bed. A boy no older than 10 ran between benches carrying jugs of mead, spilling droplets as he went, earning a light cuff on the ear from a steward. Dogs weaved between legs, noses twitching at the bones tossed under the tables. Some of the guests began pounding the wooden tables with their fists, chanting for the bedding ceremony to begin, a tradition that in many parts of medieval Europe involved escorting the newlyweds to the bridal chamber, often with raucous laughter, teasing songs, and sometimes even with the witnesses watching them climb into bed. In noble households, it was not unusual for the marriage to be consummated in the presence of family or officials to ensure the union was legitimate, the sheets later examined for proof. A disturbing concept by modern standards, it reflected the medieval obsession with lineage, inheritance, and the certainty of heirs. For many women, this night was the true beginning of their new life, one that could be marked with terror or tenderness, depending on the man they had just married. But not all guests were focused on the bedchamber. Some remained at the tables, relighting candles that had guttered in the smoky air, or peeling fruit with small, curved knives as they listened to tales told by travelers and bards. One man, whose cloak bore the crest of a distant county, recounted a wedding in which the bride had arrived on horseback dressed as a knight, and had fought her groom in a staged duel before pledging her vows. Another recalled a coastal celebration where the guests had danced barefoot in the sand and released swans across the harbor at dawn. Each region, each class, each household brought its own flavor to these ceremonies. In the Scottish Highlands, vows might be exchanged over running water, symbolizing purity and natural strength. In parts of France, bread was broken over the heads of the newlyweds for fertility. In Eastern Europe, the bride's shoes might be stolen and ransomed back to her, a playful test of the groom's willingness to provide. But no matter where or how, a wedding was never just about two people. It was a community event, a political move, a financial arrangement, a spiritual bond, all at once. Even the church, by the late Middle Ages, had developed strict rituals for blessing a marriage, but the ceremony itself often remained surprisingly brief. A priest might simply witness the couple's mutual consent and say a prayer, while the real business, the feast, the bedding, the alliances, played out beyond the chapel walls. As the night deepened and the firewood was replenished, guests began to slouch against the walls or curl on benches, cloaks wrapped tightly around them. The hall quieted only slightly, with the low murmurs of contentment and the crackling of the fire filling the space where music had once been. A few figures still wandered outside, perhaps to cool off, perhaps to steal a kiss under moonlight or relieve themselves discreetly behind a stable. And far above, in the stone tower overlooking the grounds, the bride and groom were likely left alone at last. What passed between them, soft words, silent tension, or simply sleep, would remain unspoken, hidden behind the heavy wooden door and the drawn bed curtains of embroidered linen. The wedding was nearly over, but its effects would ripple on, through bloodlines, through alliances, through stories retold at future feasts. And so, as the sun threatened to rise and the torches burned low, a new chapter in a family's saga began in silence, in shadow, and in soft breathing that no feast could capture. As the evening wore on and the sun dipped lower behind the thatched rooftops, a subtle change took hold of the village. The crisp twilight air carried with it the scent of burning pine and roasted meat, while the wedding guests, now well-fed and mildly inebriated, began to congregate near the large open space in the village square. This is where the merriment would reach its loudest crescendo, for no medieval wedding was considered complete without dancing, games, and the peculiar traditions that made each feast memorable in its own chaotic way. Dancing was a central feature of any medieval celebration, and the style varied wildly depending on the region, the class of the couple, and even the season. In a small rural village, it was far from the structured and elegant courtly dances one might imagine in a royal setting. Here, the dances were rowdy, energetic, and inclusive. A musician, often a wandering fiddler or a local with a handmade flute or bagpipes, would strike up a frenzied melody, and the villagers would respond instinctively, forming circles or lines, clapping and stomping in time with the rhythm. The The steps were not rehearsed or refined, but they were familiar to everyone. Even the bride and groom, still wrapped in layers of cloth, joined the swirl of movement, their flushed faces alight with exhilaration and sweat. This unpolished but heartfelt performance was not just for show. It had layers of meaning. Dancing was a physical expression of fertility, joy, and social unity. Sometimes, during the dancing, the older women would tie ribbons around the wrists of unmarried girls and whisper blessings in their ears, hoping to bind them to good fortune and love in the years to come. Meanwhile, the young men might find themselves the subjects of teasing chants or subtle matchmaking efforts. These light-hearted gestures masked a deeper cultural pressure. Marriage was not only a personal event, it was a communal expectation, and the dance floor was as much a marketplace of future unions as it was a place of fun. As the night deepened, other entertainments began to unfold. One common custom, especially in northern European villages, was the performance of a wedding play. These were often bawdy, comedic skits put on by the groom's friends or even the local priest, who, after a few tankards of ale, would shed all seriousness and embrace the role of jester. These performances mocked everything from rival families to the very institution of marriage itself, yet they were rarely taken as insults. In fact, the more scandalous and absurd the act, the better the laughter, and the louder the cheers. Drinking games followed. Large barrels of ale, mead, or weak wine were rolled out, and guests were challenged to feats of balance or endurance. One game might involve spinning a heavy wooden stool on one finger while reciting a tongue-twisting blessing. Another asked the players to walk a straight line while balancing a jug of beer on their heads. Those who failed, often most of them, would be doused with a splash of cold water or have a wreath of garlic placed on their heads as punishment. It was all in good humor, of course, though the hangovers the next day were no laughing matter. But beneath the noise and music, a more intimate series of traditions was also unfolding. These were quieter, more sacred, and cloaked in mystery. Among them was the ancient rite known as the bedding ceremony, a deeply symbolic, often controversial, aspect of the medieval wedding night. In some places and times, this ritual involved the entire village walking the couple to their new shared bed, sometimes with torches in hand and songs on their lips. It might sound bizarre today, but it was a cultural expression of communal support, an assurance that the union was recognized and, in some strange way, protected. In certain regions, the priest might bless the bed itself with holy water, or sprinkle salt at its corners to ward off evil spirits. The bride might be handed a small loaf of bread to place beneath her pillow, a folk remedy believed to promote fertility. Meanwhile, in the next room, older women might be quietly whispering prayers or mixing strange herbal teas designed to calm nerves or increase chances of conception. At this stage of the evening, the revelry outside reached its wildest, almost as if the village was dancing harder to mask the tender awkwardness happening indoors. People sang louder, musicians played faster, and children darted between legs with sticky hands and berry-stained lips, unaware of the deeper meanings fluttering behind the laughter. Food, still ever present, began to take on a different tone. The sweet dishes came out in full force, fig cakes dusted with honey, pastries filled with crushed almonds and cheese, and little balls of dough soaked in rosewater and fried in lard. These were considered delicacies, and while expensive spices like cinnamon and saffron were usually reserved for the wealthy, even a village wedding might splurge on a pinch or two, grinding them carefully and mixing them into the night's final servings. Elders, full from the meal and weary from the dance, began to retire to the periphery. Sitting on low stools or leaning against wooden fences, they shared stories of weddings long past. Some compared this feast to the ones they had attended in their youth, while others mumbled half-sung ballads that faded into the breeze. It was during this quiet lull, just before the embers of the fire began to dim, that one might truly feel the pulse of medieval life, both simple and profound, chaotic and sacred. And yet, even in that stillness, the night was not over, for there remained one more ritual, perhaps the strangest of all, one that blurred the line between superstition, humor, and genuine belief, something that would be whispered about long after the bride and groom were gone from the square. Let's explore that next, As the last embers of the wedding fire glowed faintly beneath the darkened sky, the villagers began to prepare for a tradition so steeped in mystery that few dared speak of it openly. And yet it was one of the most essential and eagerly anticipated parts of the celebration: the wedding games. These were far from the light-hearted dances and feasting. They carried deep symbolic meaning, blending playfulness with superstition, and served to seal the bond between the newlyweds, their families, and the wider community. In a cleared patch near the village green, torches were planted in the earth, casting flickering shadows that danced with the night breeze. The men and women gathered around in a loose circle, their faces glowing orange in the torchlight, their voices low with excitement and whispers of anticipation. It was here that the couple would be tested, not in battle, but in trials of wit, endurance, and humor. One common game was known as the shoe hunt. The bride's shoes would mysteriously disappear, sometimes spirited away by laughing children, other times taken by mischievous neighbors. The groom was then tasked with finding them, sometimes blindfolded, guided only by the cries and clues shouted from the crowd. This playful challenge was more than a jest. It symbolized the groom's commitment and willingness to pursue and protect his bride through any difficulty, a tangible metaphor for partnership in marriage. Another popular event was the egg carry. Couples, sometimes paired up and sometimes competing alone, balanced eggs on spoons and raced across uneven ground, careful not to drop the fragile symbols of new life. Laughter erupted as many failed spectacularly, sending eggs tumbling and shells cracking, much to the delight of the onlookers, who cheered and jeered in equal measure. The game was more than entertainment. It was a hopeful charm, invoking fertility and the promise of children to come. But it was not all frivolity. Certain rites held solemn weight. In some villages, the newlyweds were subjected to a blessing walk, a slow procession led by elders, who sprinkled them with water infused with herbs like rosemary, thyme, and lavender, plants believed to bring luck, health, and protection from evil spirits. The path was often lined with branches woven into arches, symbols of life's continuity and the hope for a fruitful union. Throughout the night, stories and riddles were exchanged, some light-hearted, others filled with moral lessons. These verbal games were a way to bond the community, passing wisdom from one generation to the next in memorable, engaging ways. The bride and groom often took turns participating, their responses revealing character and wit, traits prized as much as beauty or wealth. A particularly striking tradition was the crowning of the couple. This was not a regal coronation, but a symbolic crowning with wreaths of flowers or braided grasses, sometimes adorned with small bells or ribbons. The flowers chosen were never random. Each held meaning. Rosemary for remembrance, ivy for fidelity, and wild roses for passionate love. These crowns were worn not just during the feast, but often for several days afterward, a public declaration of the couple's new status and their place within the community. The wedding night's concluding moments could be both joyful and chaotic. As the revelry waned and guests began to drift away, some communities engaged in the sending off, where the couple was accompanied to their new home by a caravan of friends and family, singing traditional songs that ranged from solemn blessings to bawdy refrains. Torches lit the way, and as the procession wound through the village streets, neighbors would throw handfuls of grains or flower petals, a ritual meant to ensure abundance and fertility. In more superstitious areas, it was customary to hang charms at the doorway, sometimes sprigs of garlic, other times small pouches of herbs, or even tiny carved figures. These were believed to ward off malevolent spirits jealous of the couple's happiness or intent on bringing misfortune. The newlyweds would often be handed a small loaf of bread or a flask of wine to take with them, tokens of sustenance for their journey into married life. As the village fell into silence, the newlyweds might finally find themselves alone, the weight of the day settling upon them. For many, the transition from celebration to intimacy was daunting. These were not unions born of decades of courtship, but often arranged alliances dictated by duty and survival. The wedding games and rituals served as both preparation and protection, easing the couple into a new, shared existence. And yet, beneath the layers of ceremony, superstition, and spectacle, one truth remained clear. Medieval weddings were not merely events to be endured or forgotten. They were profound declarations of hope, resilience, and community, acts of faith in the future, despite all uncertainties that life in those turbulent times could bring. What more can we uncover about the everyday moments, the unspoken emotions, and the practical realities that shaped these marriages? Let us delve next into the role of the family, parents, siblings, and neighbors, in shaping and sustaining the couple's new life together. The role of family in medieval marriages extended far beyond the ceremony itself, weaving deeply into the daily fabric of the couple's new life and often determining the success or failure of their union. Unlike the modern ideal of marriage as a private, romantic partnership, medieval weddings were profoundly social contracts, binding not only two individuals but entire households, villages, and sometimes even political factions together. To understand this better, one must look closely at the intricate dance of relationships surrounding the bride and groom before and after their vows. From the moment a match was proposed, parents played an instrumental role, acting as negotiators, advisors, and sometimes enforcers. Fathers and mothers weighed factors such as wealth, land, lineage, and reputation, assessing how the union might benefit or harm their family's standing. For nobility and merchants, these arrangements were often formalized through contracts known as marriage settlements or dowries. These legal documents detailed the property, money, or goods to be transferred upon marriage, ensuring that both sides upheld their promises. Dowries could be substantial, ranging from livestock and grain to entire parcels of land, and were seen not just as gifts but as guarantees of the bride's well-being. Siblings, too, played vital roles. Older brothers might mentor the groom or negotiate on his behalf, while sisters often helped the bride prepare for her new home, teaching her skills like spinning, cooking, or household management. The close-knit communities typical of the medieval world meant that neighbors and extended kin frequently took part in these preparations, lending expertise or labor to set up the couple's household. It was not unusual for a young bride to arrive at her new home with a chest packed by her mother, filled with linens, clothing, and treasured keepsakes meant to remind her of her origins and provide comfort. Yet, the family's influence did not end at the threshold of the marital home. Once married, the couple's interactions with their kin could be a source of both support and strain. Parents might expect visits or financial aid, or attempt to influence decisions regarding child-rearing, property management, or alliances. Jealousies and rivalries could flare, especially when inheritance was involved. Sometimes, younger siblings harbored resentment if the new family unit seemed to draw resources away from their own prospects. At the same time, communities often rallied around the newlyweds, understanding that marriage was as much a communal venture as a private one. Neighbors brought gifts, helped with harvests, and offered advice passed down through generations. Festivals might be held not just on the wedding day but during the weeks that followed, each celebration reinforcing bonds and embedding the couple deeper into village life. Elders recited blessings and proverbs, children played games that taught lessons about loyalty and trust, and local clergy made regular visits to guide and support the pair spiritually. Yet, despite this collective involvement, the couple also faced intimate, personal challenges that were often hidden beneath layers of duty and decorum. Many marriages began with little affection or familiarity, making the development of love a slow and delicate process. Adjusting to living with someone whose habits, beliefs, and temperament might differ vastly required patience, compromise, and sometimes resilience. This was especially true in arranged marriages, where choice was limited or non-existent, and where economic or social necessity often trumped desire. In some cases, the young bride might find herself in a household where she was treated as an outsider or even a servant, expected to prove her worth through endless labor. Conversely, the groom could be pressured to assert dominance or fulfill roles that left little room for tenderness. Records and letters from the time reveal moments of tenderness and frustration, laughter and tears, reminders that medieval marriages were, at their core, human experiences filled with complexity and nuance. The surrounding family also bore the weight of fertility expectations. Producing heirs, especially male ones, was critical not just for personal legacy but for maintaining property and status. The pressure to conceive could strain relationships, and failures in this area were often met with gossip, suspicion, or worse. Remedies for infertility ranged from folk magic and herbal concoctions to prayers and pilgrimages, reflecting a blend of hope, desperation, and faith. Despite these pressures, many couples forged strong bonds over time. Shared labor in the fields, mutual care during illness, and the raising of children created connections that transcended the initial arrangements. Letters and chronicles occasionally capture moments of affection and partnership, hinting at the quiet triumphs that underpinned many medieval marriages. Understanding the centrality of family and community provides crucial context for the realities behind the wedding day's pageantry. Beyond the feast and rituals, marriage was a lifelong negotiation of roles, resources, emotions, and survival. What about the spaces where these negotiations played out? The homes, the fields, the hearths? And how did the everyday lives of newlyweds unfold once the guests had departed and the music had faded? Our journey continues as we explore the intimate rhythms of married life in the medieval world. Once the last of the wedding guests had departed, the music faded into the quiet hum of the village settling down for the night, and the flickering torches were extinguished one by one. The newlywed couple faced a world transformed. The vibrant spectacle of celebration gave way to the intimate, often challenging reality of married life, where the grand gestures and public affirmations melted into daily rhythms and shared responsibilities. It was here, within the modest walls of their new home, that the true test of marriage began, a test far removed from the pomp and ceremony of the wedding day. For many, the transition to this new life was marked by practical adjustments that touched every aspect of existence. The bride, often leaving behind the familiar comforts of her childhood household, now had to learn the art of managing a new home, which could range from a simple peasant's cottage to a lord's manor. She might be responsible for tending the hearth fire, baking bread, preserving vegetables, and spinning wool to clothe the family. These tasks were labor-intensive and required skills often passed down through generations, but every woman was expected to master them swiftly. Assistance came in the form of older female relatives or neighbors who might visit regularly to offer advice or lend a helping hand, but ultimately, the success of the household depended on the bride's ability to oversee these duties. The groom, on the other hand, faced his own challenges, managing fields, livestock, or trade, while also taking on the role of protector and provider. In rural settings, this meant waking before dawn to tend to animals, plow fields, or repair fences. In towns or cities, it might involve overseeing apprentices, managing goods, or handling debts. The burden of economic survival rested heavily on his shoulders, and while the marriage promised shared effort, it was the husband who often bore the brunt of external pressures. Despite these divisions of labor, daily life required collaboration. Couples developed routines, shared meals, often simple fare like pottage, a thick stew of vegetables and grains, coarse bread, and salted fish, and cared for children. The act of eating together was itself a ritual of unity, a moment to exchange news and reaffirm bonds amid the constant demands of work. Meals were rarely lavish. Spices and delicacies reserved for special occasions were luxuries, and most sustenance was humble and seasonal. Household harmony could be fragile. Conflicts might arise over tasks left undone, disputes about money, or tensions around extended family involvement. The medieval world was a close-knit one, and privacy was limited. Walls were thin, rooms multifunctional, and neighbors ever watchful. Gossip could spread quickly, turning personal disagreements into public scandals. For this reason, many couples cultivated diplomacy, learning to temper tempers and navigate the intricate social webs of their communities. Children brought joy but also strain. From infancy, they were integrated into the household's daily labor and learning. Mothers taught daughters the arts of homemaking, while sons shadowed their fathers in trades or farming. The survival of offspring was uncertain, given high infant mortality rates, and each child was both a blessing and a vital investment in the family's future. Religious observance remained central. Couples attended church together, participated in seasonal festivals, and observed fasts and holy days that punctuated the year. Clergy often provided counsel, officiated baptisms and funerals, and served as mediators in disputes. The church's teachings influenced every aspect of marriage, from sexual conduct to inheritance rights, and adherence to its doctrines was both spiritual duty and social expectation. Amidst these routines, moments of tenderness and affection did emerge. Letters and poems from the period reveal glimpses of love, longing, and companionship. Shared laughter over a child's antics, quiet conversations by the hearth, and mutual care during illness testified to bonds that deepened over time, transcending the transactional origins of many marriages. Yet life was precarious. Disease, famine, and war loomed as constant threats, and sudden loss could shatter families. In these trials, marriage served as a vital source of stability, offering companionship and mutual support in a harsh and unpredictable world. In understanding the lived experience of medieval marriage, we glimpse a complex tapestry woven from duty, love, struggle, and hope, a testament to the resilience of ordinary people forging lives together amid the uncertainties of their age. Our next chapter will explore the role of festivities beyond the wedding day itself. Seasonal fairs, harvest celebrations, and communal rituals that sustained and celebrated married life throughout the year. Beyond the wedding day and the quiet rhythms of daily life, medieval marriage was deeply intertwined with the cycle of the seasons and the communal festivities that punctuated the year. These celebrations were more than mere entertainment. They reinforced social bonds, expressed shared beliefs, and provided moments of relief from the hardships of medieval existence. For newlyweds, participation in these events was both a rite of passage and a vital means of weaving themselves into the fabric of their community. One of the most significant occasions was the Harvest Festival, often held in late summer or early autumn, when the hard work of reaping fields finally yielded its bounty. The entire village gathered to give thanks, and newly married couples were expected to join in fully. Fields would be decorated with garlands of flowers, woven sheaves of wheat, and painted ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Long tables groaned beneath the weight of freshly baked bread, roasted meats, and hearty stews flavored with the last herbs of the season. Music and dancing filled the air, sometimes lasting from dawn till dusk. Minstrels and fiddlers played familiar tunes, and villagers young and old took to the dance floor in joyful abandon. For the bride and groom, these festivals were an opportunity to celebrate their union publicly once more, to be seen and embraced by their community, and to renew commitments made at their wedding. In colder months, the festivities shifted to mark the turning of the year, blending Christian observances with older, pagan traditions. The winter solstice, for example, was often celebrated with feasting, gift-giving, and lighting of candles or fires, a symbolic illumination during the darkest days. These rituals were thought to protect the community from evil spirits and ensure the return of sunlight and fertility. Newlyweds might receive special blessings during these events, their marriage symbolizing hope and continuity. Religious holidays such as Easter and Christmas were also times of communal gathering. The church played a central role in orchestrating celebrations, from midnight masses to processions, which often culminated in shared meals and lively fairs. At these fairs, markets bustled with traders selling cloth, tools, spices, and toys, while entertainers performed feats of juggling, acrobatics, and storytelling. Throughout the year, smaller events, saints' days, village fairs, and market days, offered occasions for socializing and matchmaking. Young people, including those recently married, might exchange glances across crowded squares or participate in courtship rituals embedded within traditional dances and games. Such moments fostered not only personal relationships but also strengthened community cohesion. In this cyclical rhythm of feast and labor, joy and devotion, the newlywed couple gradually transformed from outsiders, individuals bound by contract, into fully integrated members of their society. Their marriage became a living part of the cultural landscape, supported and shaped by the shared celebrations and hardships of medieval life. Yet, amid these communal joys, not all was always harmonious. Seasonal tensions, rivalries between families, and the ever-present threat of famine or conflict could strain relationships and test the bonds of marriage. Navigating these challenges required wisdom, resilience, and often the support of kin and neighbors. Thus, The story of medieval weddings and married life is not confined to a single day or moment but unfolds over years, seasons, and generations. A continuous dance of tradition, adaptation, and human connection. What secrets lie in the spaces between these grand events? How did love, conflict, and everyday moments shape the lives of those bound together in marriage? Our journey continues into the private and public worlds that newlyweds inhabited beyond the celebrations. Beyond the bright festivities and communal gatherings, the everyday realities of medieval married life often unfolded within the small, intimate spaces that the couple shared: their home, the hearth, the fields, and the market. These places bore witness to the joys, struggles, and quiet moments that defined marriage far more than any grand celebration. To truly understand the lives of medieval newlyweds, we must step inside these spaces and listen closely to the rhythms that shaped their existence. A typical married household, even among the peasantry, was a bustling center of activity. The dwelling might be a simple timber-framed cottage with a thatched roof, one or two rooms warmed by a central hearth, its chimney venting smoke directly into the open rafters. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning wood, animal hides, and the earthy aromas of stored vegetables and herbs hung from ceiling beams. Light was scarce, flickering from tallow candles or small oil lamps, casting dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls. The hearth was the heart of the home, a source of warmth, light, and sustenance. Around it, the couple would prepare meals, mend clothing, spin wool, or tend to sick children. Cooking was a laborious task, requiring constant attention to maintain fires for roasting or boiling, and the available ingredients were often limited by season and circumstance. Stews made from grains, root vegetables, salted meats, or fish were staples, flavored with whatever herbs could be grown or gathered nearby. Bread, a daily necessity, was baked in communal ovens or at home if one was fortunate enough. Privacy, as understood today, was rare. Walls offered little soundproofing, and family members, children, and sometimes livestock shared close quarters. This proximity meant that personal moments were often communal. A new mother might nurse her infant while other women carded wool nearby, exchanging advice and stories. This shared living reinforced social bonds but could also be a source of tension, especially as the newlyweds worked to establish their own household identity. Beyond the home, daily tasks shaped the couple's cooperation. The husband's responsibilities often involved working the land, plowing fields, tending animals, repairing fences, or managing trade and barter. The wife's duties were equally demanding, overseeing food preparation, household cleanliness, childcare, and the production of textiles and clothing. Their work was interdependent, each relying on the other to meet the family's needs. Yet their roles were distinct and often strictly defined by gender norms and social expectations. The market was a critical space for married couples, especially in towns and villages where trade flourished. Trips to the market were opportunities to procure necessities like salt, tools, cloth, and spices, or to sell surplus produce and crafts. These excursions required negotiation skills, knowledge of goods and prices, and sometimes a degree of bravado to fend off cheats or rivals. For the wife, market visits could be social occasions as well, occasions to exchange news, gossip, and advice with other women. In moments of leisure, rare as they were, the couple might share simple pleasures: a quiet evening by the fire listening to a traveling minstrel, a stroll through nearby woods or fields, or storytelling beneath the stars. These were times when affection could grow, bonds could deepen, and the strains of daily toil could momentarily fade. But hardship was never far away. Illness, accidents, crop failures, and disputes were common and could swiftly destabilize a household. The loss of a child, a common tragedy in medieval times, brought grief that could strain even the strongest unions. Support networks of family, neighbors, and the church played vital roles in times of crisis, providing practical help and emotional solace. Despite these challenges, many couples found resilience in their partnership. Over time, shared experiences created a foundation of trust and companionship. Letters from the period, though rare, reveal tender words of love and longing, moments of humor and frustration, and a profound sense of shared destiny. In the quiet corners of medieval homes, away from the public eye, marriage was lived not as a grand spectacle but as an ongoing negotiation. A dance of survival, affection, duty, and hope. What of the children born into these unions? How did their arrival change the dynamics of marriage and family life? Our exploration will next turn to the next generation. The hopes, fears, and responsibilities that children brought to medieval marriages. Children were at the heart of medieval marriages, viewed not only as blessings but as essential to the continuation of family lines, inheritance, and the very survival of communities. Their arrival was both cause for joy and anxiety, a hopeful promise mingled with the harsh realities of high infant mortality and the demands they placed on parents. Pregnancy itself was a time of caution and care, surrounded by rituals and superstitions designed to protect both mother and child. Midwives played a crucial role, serving not only as birth attendants but also as repositories of knowledge about herbs, healing, and spiritual practices. Their presence was a comfort during the often perilous process of childbirth, which could last hours or days in small, poorly equipped homes. The birth of a child was usually marked by simple ceremonies, a blessing from the priest, the naming of the baby, and perhaps a modest gathering of close family. Baptism was especially significant, believed to cleanse the infant's soul and welcome them into the Christian community. Given the risks, many families rushed to baptize newborns as soon as possible. Raising children in the medieval period was a demanding task that involved not only care but education in the social roles they were expected to fill. Boys were groomed to take on the trades, farms, or offices of their fathers, learning skills through apprenticeship or hands-on labor from a young age. Girls were instructed in domestic arts, spinning, weaving, cooking, and childcare, preparing them for their future roles as wives and mothers. These lessons often began early, with children contributing to household tasks as soon as they were able. The presence of children altered the dynamic of marriage, deepening bonds between husband and wife, but also introducing new pressures. The health and survival of offspring became paramount concerns, with parents constantly vigilant against illness and malnutrition. Communities shared knowledge about remedies, and prayers for protection were frequent. Yet the loss of a child, heartbreakingly common, was a sorrow that could strain relationships and test faith. Despite these challenges, children were also a source of joy and continuity. Their laughter and play brought lightness to homes often filled with toil and worry. Stories and songs were passed down to them, weaving family histories and cultural traditions into the fabric of daily life. Through them, parents hoped to leave a legacy that would endure beyond their own lifetimes. Marriage and family life in the medieval era, therefore, was a complex interplay of love, duty, hardship, and hope. It was shaped not only by grand ceremonies and public festivities, but by the quiet, persistent rhythms of everyday existence, of shared meals, whispered prayers, laughter, and tears. Our next exploration will turn to the darker shadows that sometimes fell over medieval marriages. The conflicts, betrayals, and societal pressures that could challenge even the strongest unions. What happened when love was absent or when loyalty was tested? How did medieval society respond to the strains within marriage? While many medieval marriages were marked by cooperation and mutual support, the reality was often far more complicated and sometimes darker. Conflict, betrayal, and societal pressures cast long shadows over the lives of many couples, testing their bonds and shaping their futures in profound ways. Understanding these challenges is crucial to grasping the full picture of medieval marriage, beyond the pageantry and celebrations. At the heart of many marital conflicts were the very reasons marriages were arranged: economic interests, social status, and family alliances. Love was not always the foundation, and mismatched expectations could lead to resentment or estrangement. A husband might resent a wife who failed to produce heirs or who lacked the skills to manage the household, while a wife could feel trapped in a life dictated by duty, isolated from her family and friends. Communication, as we understand it today, was often limited. Many marriages involved partners who barely knew each other before their wedding day. Without shared interests or emotional connection, misunderstandings and frustrations could grow. Social norms placed heavy burdens on women to be obedient and faithful, but these expectations were not always reciprocated by men, who sometimes took mistresses or neglected their wives. Adultery was a serious offense, especially for women, carrying harsh social and legal consequences. Women accused of infidelity risked public shaming, physical punishment, or even exile. Men, while not immune to censure, often faced more lenient treatment, reflecting the gendered double standards of the time. Such betrayals could devastate families, triggering feuds or legal disputes over property and legitimacy. Divorce, as it is known today, was exceedingly rare and difficult to obtain. The Church's teachings emphasized the indissolubility of marriage, viewing it as a sacred and lifelong covenant. Annulments could be granted, but only under specific circumstances such as consanguinity, being too closely related, or impotence. Couples trapped in unhappy unions had few options, often forced to endure their circumstances or seek informal separations that risked social stigma. Violence within marriage, while not widely documented due to the limited records and social taboos, undoubtedly existed. Domestic disputes could escalate, and the power imbalance between husband and wife left many women vulnerable. However, some laws and customs did offer protections, albeit limited, against extreme abuse, and communities sometimes intervened in cases of severe mistreatment. Societal pressures extended beyond the couple to their families and communities, which closely monitored behavior and adherence to moral codes. Gossip, public opinion, and religious authority all played roles in enforcing norms, making marriage not only a private contract but a public institution subject to scrutiny. Despite these challenges, many couples navigated difficulties with resilience, finding ways to build understanding, compromise, and affection over time. Letters, court records, and chronicles reveal stories of forgiveness, reconciliation, and enduring partnership amidst adversity. These darker realities did not diminish the importance of marriage but added layers of complexity to the institution, reflecting the tensions between individual desires and collective expectations in medieval society. Our next chapter will delve into the legal frameworks and church doctrines that governed marriage, exploring how law, religion, and custom intertwined to shape the rights, duties, and protections of spouses in medieval Europe. In medieval Europe, marriage was not only a social and personal matter, but also a legal and religious institution governed by an intricate web of laws, customs, and church doctrines. These frameworks profoundly influenced the rights, duties, and protections of spouses, shaping how marriages were formed, maintained, and, in some rare cases, dissolved. To truly grasp the medieval marriage experience, one must understand how law and religion intertwined to regulate the intimate bonds between husband and wife. At the heart of medieval marriage law was the Church, which regarded marriage as a sacred sacrament, a holy covenant mirroring the union between Christ and his Church. This theological foundation meant that marriage was indissoluble in the eyes of God, a bond that no human authority could easily sever. The Church's involvement extended from the solemnization of the marriage to overseeing disputes and ensuring moral conduct. Priests were often present to witness vows, bless unions, and perform rites such as baptism and funerals within the marital household. Canon law, the Church's legal system, prescribed specific conditions for a valid marriage. Consent was paramount. Both parties had to freely agree to marry, even if families arranged the match. Mutual consent, often expressed through the exchange of vows, created a binding contract before God and community. Interestingly, formal ceremonies in churches were not always mandatory, especially in early medieval periods. Public acknowledgement and consent could suffice. However, over time, the Church standardized procedures to prevent clandestine unions, requiring bans, public announcements, and formal blessings. The Church also regulated who could marry, imposing prohibitions based on consanguinity, blood relation, and affinity, relations by marriage. Marriages within certain degrees of kinship were forbidden to prevent inbreeding and uphold social order. These rules could be complicated, with dispensations sometimes granted by bishops or the Pope, especially for noble families seeking advantageous alliances. Such dispensations were expensive and politically significant, underscoring how marriage intersected with power and influence. Beyond religious oversight, secular authorities played vital roles in marriage, particularly concerning property rights and inheritance. Marriages were strategic tools for consolidating wealth, land, and political alliances. Legal contracts often accompanied weddings, detailing dowries, the property a bride brought to her husband, and dower rights, provisions securing a widow's livelihood. These arrangements protected family interests and could influence negotiations years after the ceremony. Health concerns loomed large in private life. Fear of disease, infertility, and complications from childbirth influenced behaviors and attitudes. Couples might delay intercourse during illness or ritual impurity, adhere to fasting periods, or use amulets for protection. The intersection of spirituality and medicine shaped practices aimed at safeguarding both body and soul. Sexual rituals extended beyond the act itself. The preparation of the marital bed, the selection of linens embroidered with symbols of fertility, and the recitation of prayers before union all imbued the experience with layers of meaning and hope. Stories of saints and martyrs who exemplified chastity or divine love provided models that inspired or challenged individuals' choices. Throughout these intimate spaces, people negotiated the complexities of love, power, faith, and survival. Their lives remind us that medieval sexuality was not merely a set of prohibitions, but a lived reality full of contradictions, adaptations, and humanity. In understanding these private moments, we gain insight into the fullness of medieval life beyond the official narratives. Medieval wedding ceremonies were rich tapestries of symbolism, ritual, and meaning, carefully crafted to honor the sacredness of the union and to publicly affirm the commitments being made. These ceremonies varied by region, class, and time period, but they shared a common purpose: to sanctify the marriage in the eyes of God and the community, ensuring that the union was recognized, respected, and supported. The ceremony often began with a formal blessing by the local priest, typically held in the church, though in some rural areas or earlier times, parts of the ceremony could take place in the home or village square. The couple would stand before the altar, often adorned with flowers, candles, and symbols of faith such as crosses or statues of saints. The church itself, with its soaring arches and stained glass windows, served as a sacred space that framed the solemnity and joy of the occasion. Vows were central to the ceremony. Unlike today's personalized promises, medieval vows were usually standardized formulas, emphasizing lifelong fidelity, mutual support, and obedience, particularly the wife's obedience to her husband. These vows were exchanged publicly, sometimes in Latin or the vernacular, binding the couple in a sacred contract witnessed by the congregation. The priest's role was crucial here, as he pronounced the couple married under divine authority, making their union indissoluble. Rings were often exchanged as visible signs of this bond. The symbolism of the ring, a circle with no end, represented eternal love and commitment. While today's sparkling gemstones were rare or reserved for nobility, simple bands of gold, silver, or even iron might be used. The giving of a ring was accompanied by prayers and blessings, linking the material token to spiritual grace. Other rituals added layers of meaning and community involvement. The sharing of a cup or morsel of bread symbolized unity and the sharing of life's sustenance. The bride might be veiled, a sign of modesty and transition from maidenhood to wifehood, while the groom might don special attire indicating his new status. Sometimes, the couple was crowned with wreaths of flowers or ribbons, echoing ancient fertility rites and the hope for prosperity. Music and singing played important roles, setting the tone of the ceremony and lifting the spirits of all present. Hymns and chants, often performed by choirs or soloists, invoked blessings and celebrated divine love. The acoustics of the church amplified these sounds, creating an atmosphere both solemn and uplifting. Processions were another key element, both entering and leaving the church, and sometimes continuing through the village. The couple, accompanied by family, friends, and clergy, would walk in a formal line, often carrying candles or crosses. This public movement symbolized the transition from single life to married partnership and invited the community to witness and support the new union. Processions were another key element, both entering and leaving the church, and sometimes continuing through the village. The couple, accompanied by family, friends, and clergy, would walk in a formal line, often carrying candles or crosses. This public movement symbolized the transition from single life to married partnership and invited the community to witness and support the new union. Feasting and celebration followed the religious ceremony, but even here, ritual continued. The bride's parents might formally give her away, signifying the transfer of responsibility and honor. Toasts were made, sometimes with specially brewed alesh or wines, and blessings pronounced over food and drink. Guests participated in dances and games that reinforced social bonds and communal joy. Throughout the ceremony and feast, the presence of the church was palpable, underscoring that marriage was not merely a contract between two individuals, but a sacred institution ordained by God. This spiritual framing carried expectations of moral conduct, procreation, and lifelong commitment. Yet, despite this solemnity, medieval weddings were also lively, joyous occasions filled with laughter, music, and sometimes even bawdy humor. They reflected the hopes, fears, and dreams of communities facing an uncertain world, where marriage was both a personal milestone and a vital social cornerstone. Understanding these ceremonies illuminates how medieval people experienced and valued marriage, not just as a legal or economic arrangement, but as a profound act of faith, community, and love. Next, we will delve into the role of food and drink in medieval weddings, what was served, how it was prepared, and what these choices reveal about status, tradition, and celebration. Food and drink were central to medieval weddings, transforming the celebration from a solemn religious rite into a vivid, communal feast that nourished not only the body but also the bonds between families and neighbors. The wedding banquet was a sensory experience filled with colors, aromas, sounds, and tastes, carefully arranged to convey status, abundance, and goodwill. What was served, how it was prepared, and who partook in the feast all carried symbolic weight, reflecting social hierarchies, regional customs, and deep-rooted traditions. The preparation for a wedding feast began days, sometimes weeks in advance. Villagers or household servants worked tirelessly to procure ingredients, slaughter animals, bake bread, brew ale, and craft sweet confections. This labor-intensive process united communities in anticipation of the event, with neighbors often contributing food, firewood, or their skills in cooking and butchery. For noble families, elaborate kitchens staffed by cooks and apprentices produced multi-course meals that dazzled guests, while peasant weddings featured simpler, hearty fare drawn from local farms and gardens. The centerpiece of most wedding feasts was meat, a luxury for many medieval people. Roasted fowl such as capons, geese, or swans often took pride of place, their golden skin glistening from the spit over open flames. Beef, pork, or lamb might be served in stews rich with herbs and spices imported from faraway lands. Fish, particularly salted or smoked varieties, was common during religious fasts or in coastal communities. The inclusion of game like venison or wild boar signaled status and generosity, reserved for wealthier households or special occasions. Accompanying the meats were a variety of side dishes, pottages made from grains and legumes, seasoned with onions, garlic, and aromatic herbs, fresh and dried fruits offering sweetness, and an assortment of breads, from coarse rye loaves to delicate wheat rolls. Vegetables, often harvested from kitchen gardens, provided color and texture, though their variety was limited compared to modern standards. The presentation of food itself was theatrical. Dishes might be adorned with decorative elements, such as carved vegetables or sugar sculptures shaped like birds or flowers, showcasing culinary artistry and celebrating abundance. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, though expensive, were sprinkled generously, signaling wealth and sophistication. Wine and ale flowed freely, poured into goblets and tankards as guests toasted the health and happiness of the newlyweds. Sweets and desserts, while less common, added a final note of celebration. Honey cakes, sugared almonds, and fruit preserves delighted palates, often served alongside exotic delicacies brought through trade routes. For the nobility, sugar was a prized ingredient, used to craft intricate confectionery displays that amazed attendees. The feast was more than sustenance. It was a powerful social performance. Seating arrangements emphasized hierarchy, with the bride and groom placed at the center of a long table, flanked by parents, nobility, or important community members. Servants attended constantly, refilling cups and bringing new dishes. Toasts and speeches punctuated the meal, blending humor, blessing, and sometimes veiled political messages. Beyond the formal banquet, food also played a role in various rituals associated with the wedding. The bridal cake, often a dense, spiced loaf, might be shared among guests or broken over the bride's head as a symbol of fertility and good fortune. Guests might receive small tokens of sweets or baked goods to take home, extending the celebration beyond the day itself. In more modest communities, the wedding feast was simpler but no less meaningful. Local ingredients were celebrated, and shared labor reinforced social cohesion. The joy of gathering, eating, and drinking together forged bonds that carried the couple into their new life. Through the food and drink of medieval weddings, we glimpse a world where celebration was a communal act, where abundance was both literal and symbolic, and where the joys of marriage were tasted and savored with every bite. Our journey next will explore the music, dance, and entertainment that enliven these weddings, the sounds and movements that brought communities together and marked the joyous transition into married life. Music, dance, and lively entertainment were the heartbeats of medieval wedding celebrations, infusing the day with joy, energy, and communal spirit. These vibrant expressions of culture did far more than merely amuse. They served as essential rituals, binding families and communities together in shared celebration and marking the profound transition from single life to marital partnership. To truly appreciate the medieval wedding experience, we must immerse ourselves in the sounds, rhythms, and performances that echoed through halls, village squares, and churchyards during these festive occasions. Musicians, whether professional minstrels, traveling troubadours, or talented local players, were in high demand for weddings. Their instruments ranged from the familiar harps, lutes, fiddles, and flutes, to the more exotic, like bagpipes, shawms, and drums. These performers filled the air with melodies that ranged from solemn hymns to lively dance tunes, setting moods that shifted with the ceremony and the feast. Their music was not mere background noise, but a vital component that energized guests, encouraged participation, and punctuated key moments. The dancing itself was a spectacle of movement, social interaction, and symbolic meaning. Traditional dances varied widely across regions, but often involved intricate patterns, group formations, and partner exchanges. The bride and groom typically led or were featured prominently in these dances, their movements symbolizing unity, fertility, and harmony. Guests of all ages joined in, from sprightly children to venerable elders, turning the gathering into a shared experience of joy and togetherness. Courtly dances among the nobility could be elaborate and graceful, demanding skill and training. Dances like the brannel or pavane featured stately steps and flowing gestures, reflecting the refinement and decorum expected of the upper classes. In villages, the dances were often simpler but no less spirited, with circle dances, reels, and jig-like movements accompanied by clapping, singing, or rhythmic foot stomping. Entertainment extended beyond music and dance to include performances that captivated and delighted. Storytellers and jesters wove tales and jokes, sometimes poking fun at local figures or the newlyweds themselves, providing laughter and lightheartedness. Acrobats, magicians, and puppeteers might perform feats of agility, sleight of hand, or puppet shows, mesmerizing guests with their skill and whimsy. Games were another popular form of amusement. Guests might engage in contests of strength or skill, such as wrestling, archery, or tug-of-war, often organized as friendly competitions between families or villages. These activities reinforced social bonds and allowed for playful rivalry, blending physical exertion with social interaction. The sounds of the wedding, the strumming of lutes, the pealing of bells, the stamping of feet, and the laughter of guests created an atmosphere charged with vitality. Songs often carried messages of love, fidelity, or fertility, linking entertainment with the deeper themes of marriage. Sometimes, bawdy or humorous ballads entertained adults, offering a contrast to the solemnity of the church ceremony and highlighting the human, earthy side of celebration. Even the transition from day to night was marked by changes in entertainment. Evening might bring bonfires, storytelling under the stars, or quiet singing around the hearth. These moments offered intimacy amid festivity, a chance for reflection and connection. In some, music, dance, and entertainment were not mere diversions but essential expressions of medieval culture, celebrating marriage as a communal and joyous milestone. They enlivened the wedding day, strengthened social ties, and created memories that would resonate long after the last notes faded. Our next section will examine the role of clothing, adornment, and symbolism in medieval weddings, the garments and accessories that told stories of status, identity, and hope. Clothing and adornment at medieval weddings were far more than simple displays of fashion. They were rich with symbolism, communicating social status, family identity, and the hopes and expectations placed upon the bride and groom. The garments worn during these ceremonies were carefully chosen, often commissioned with great care, and imbued with layers of meaning that extended beyond mere appearance. Understanding what people wore, how they adorned themselves, and what these choices represented reveals much about the values and structures of medieval society. For the bride, the wedding attire was a visible declaration of her new status and the prosperity or aspirations of her family. Contrary to the modern notion of a white wedding dress symbolizing purity, a tradition that only became popular centuries later, medieval brides wore dresses in a variety of colors, fabrics, and styles, often reflecting their social rank and regional customs. Bright hues such as deep reds, rich blues, or vibrant greens were common, with the dyes themselves being costly and signaling wealth. Luxurious materials like silk, velvet, or fine wool were reserved for the nobility or wealthy merchants, while commoners wore garments made of coarser fabrics like linen or undyed wool. Embroidery, fur trims, and decorative elements such as pearls or precious stones adorned the dresses of the elite, transforming the bride into a living emblem of her family's prestige. Headwear was equally significant. Veils, wimples, or elaborate headdresses such as hennins, the iconic pointed hats, were worn by noblewomen, symbolizing modesty and femininity. In some regions, brides wore circlets or crowns of flowers, weaving ancient fertility symbols into their attire. The groom's clothing likewise reflected his rank and role. A fine tunic or doublet, hose, and cloak made of quality fabrics conveyed his social standing, while accessories like belts, gloves, or jeweled pins added to the ceremonial grandeur. The color and style of his garments might coordinate with the bride's, symbolizing their unity and shared purpose. In noble weddings, the groom might also wear armor or heraldic emblems, reinforcing family identity and martial responsibilities. Beyond status, clothing carried symbolic meanings related to marriage itself. The bride's veil, for example, represented purity and modesty, as well as her transition from maidenhood to wifehood. The act of unveiling, often performed by the groom after the ceremony, was a ritual moment, signaling the couple's new intimacy and the bride's entrance into married life. The exchange of rings, embroidered gloves, or other tokens further deepened these layers of symbolism. Colors used in wedding attire and decorations were also imbued with significance. Red, associated with passion and fertility, was popular, while green symbolized growth and renewal. Gold and silver signified wealth and divine favor. The blending of these colors in garments and ceremony created a visual narrative of hope, prosperity, and sacred union. Footwear, often overlooked, also played a role. Shoes or slippers made of fine leather or fabric might be gifted to the bride, symbolizing her readiness to step into a new path. In some customs, the bride would leave behind old shoes or slippers as a sign of leaving her past life. Jewelry was another important element, with necklaces, brooches, and rings serving both decorative and symbolic purposes. These items might be family heirlooms or gifts from the groom's family, embodying the merging of two lineages and the transfer of wealth and responsibility. The attire of guests also contributed to the visual tapestry of the wedding. Families and communities dressed in their best, adding to the spectacle and underscoring the importance of the event. Children might wear specially made garments, participating in the ceremonial roles of flower bearers or attendants. Together, clothing and adornment transformed medieval weddings into rich, multisensory experiences. They communicated identity, conveyed social messages, and enacted ancient symbols of fertility, fidelity, and fortune. Through fabric, color, and ornament, the couple's union was made visible to all, intertwining personal and communal narratives. Our next section will explore the spiritual and superstitious beliefs surrounding medieval weddings, the prayers, charms, and rituals meant to protect, bless, and ensure prosperity for the newlyweds. In the medieval world, weddings were steeped not only in legal and social significance, but also in a rich tapestry of spiritual beliefs and superstitions that shaped how people understood marriage and its promises. These beliefs were woven into every moment of the ceremony and celebration, serving to protect the couple, invoke divine favor, and ensure a prosperous and harmonious union. To the medieval mind, marriage was as much a mystical journey as it was a social contract, fraught with unseen forces and symbolic acts. Central to the spiritual dimension was the pervasive influence of the Church, whose rituals and prayers aimed to consecrate the marriage under God's watchful eye. The ceremony itself was considered a sacred rite, with priests invoking blessings to shield the couple from harm and to bind them in holy unity. These prayers were not mere formalities but heartfelt appeals for grace, fertility, and moral strength, qualities deemed essential for the success of the marriage and the well-being of the community it supported. Beyond the official rites, a host of folk customs and superstitions flourished, reflecting a blend of Christian teachings and older, pagan traditions. Many of these beliefs centered on protecting the bride and groom from malevolent spirits or misfortune, which were thought to be particularly active during times of transition. For instance, the bride might carry a sprig of rosemary or wear a small charm to ward off evil eyes and jealousy. The color red, often featured in wedding garments or decorations, was believed to repel negativity and attract fertility. Some communities practiced rituals involving fire, water, or salt, elements regarded as purifying and protective. A common custom was for the couple to jump over a small fire or walk through water after the ceremony, symbolizing cleansing and the crossing into a new life. Salt might be sprinkled on the doorstep or mixed into food, acting as a preservative and symbol of longevity. Lucky objects and gestures abounded. It was customary, for example, for the bride to leave behind some small token, like a coin or a piece of bread, on the doorstep, offering it to spirits or neighbors as a peace gesture ensuring goodwill and protection. The throwing of handfuls of grain or dried herbs at the couple as they left the church was a wish for fertility and abundance, echoing ancient agricultural rites. Dreams and omens also held great significance. A bride's or groom's dreams before the wedding were often interpreted as signs of the future, with midwives, elders, or clergy offering advice based on these visions. Seeing certain animals, such as birds or rabbits, was considered auspicious, while bad omens were met with prayers and counter-rituals. In some regions, the community itself engaged in playful rituals to test the bride and groom's readiness. These could include lighthearted teasing, symbolic kidnappings, or challenges that the couple had to overcome together, reinforcing their bond and demonstrating resilience. Such customs served both to entertain and to spiritually prepare the couple for the realities ahead. The influence of superstition extended into the practical aspects of the wedding as well. Choosing the right day was critical, with weddings often scheduled to avoid unlucky dates, celestial events, or religious fasts. Astrologers and local wise women might be consulted to select an auspicious time, aligning the marriage with cosmic forces believed to favor harmony and success. These spiritual and superstitious elements underscored the medieval understanding of marriage as a union not just between two people, but as a passage through a world filled with unseen powers and fragile fortunes. The rituals, prayers, and charms were a way to navigate these uncertainties, to claim divine protection, and to ensure that the couple's love would endure despite the challenges ahead. In the next chapter, we will look at the important role of family and community in supporting, or sometimes complicating, the marriage, exploring how these networks influence daily life, celebrations, and conflict. In medieval society, marriage was never simply the union of two individuals. It was a powerful alliance between families and a cornerstone of the broader community's social fabric. The roles played by relatives, neighbors, and local institutions were crucial, sometimes supportive, sometimes contentious, in shaping the experience of married life. Understanding these intricate networks of kinship and community reveals how marriages were embedded within larger systems of obligation, honor, and influence. From the earliest negotiations, families were deeply involved in arranging marriages, especially among the nobility and wealthier classes, where alliances could shift political power or consolidate estates. Parents, guardians, and sometimes extended kin exercised significant control over the choice of spouse, viewing the union as a strategic investment. This oversight often meant that the couple's personal feelings were secondary to family interests, creating pressure to conform and maintain harmony with broader goals. The day of the wedding itself was a communal event, with relatives and neighbors participating in preparations, ceremonies, and celebrations. Extended family members, uncles, aunts, cousins, often traveled great distances to attend, bringing gifts that reflected their status and goodwill. In villages, the whole community might join in, contributing food, labor, or entertainment, underscoring the collective nature of the event. This communal involvement reinforced social bonds and affirmed the couple's place within the local hierarchy. Once married, couples relied heavily on family networks for support in everyday life and during crises. Assistance could come in the form of childcare, agricultural labor, financial aid, or mediation in disputes. In times of illness, childbirth complications, or crop failures, relatives often provided indispensable help, reflecting a shared interest in the couple's success and survival. Such interdependence forged deep connections but could also lead to conflicts over resources or authority. Neighbors and the wider community also played a critical role in monitoring behavior and enforcing social norms. Marriages were public contracts as much as private relationships, subject to gossip, judgment, and intervention. Community members might mediate disputes or hold couples accountable for fulfilling their obligations, such as contributing to communal labor or maintaining moral conduct. This oversight ensured that marriages served not only personal interests but also upheld communal stability. However, these networks could sometimes complicate married life. Rivalries between families, inheritance disputes, or lingering grievances could spill over into the marriage, creating tension and conflict. The involvement of powerful relatives might pressure couples into decisions or behaviors that cause strain. In some cases, interference from kin could lead to separation or estrangement, though formal divorce remained rare. Marriage celebrations themselves could be arenas of both joy and rivalry. Competing families might use the occasion to display wealth and status, sometimes escalating tensions through ostentatious displays or subtle provocations. Negotiating these social dynamics required diplomacy and tact, adding layers of complexity to what was ostensibly a personal milestone. The church also functioned as a community institution, providing spiritual guidance, education, and social services. Priests and religious leaders often acted as mediators in marital disputes, advisors on moral issues, and supporters during life's challenges. Parish churches served as centers where families gathered not only for weddings but for baptisms, funerals, and festivals, weaving marriage into the larger cycle of communal life. In rural areas, guilds, confraternities, and local councils might further influence marriage customs and community support, embedding couples within networks that extended beyond immediate kin. These associations could provide economic assistance, social opportunities, and spiritual benefits, reinforcing the idea that marriage was a communal endeavor. Ultimately, medieval marriages existed within a dense web of relationships that shaped their successes and failures. The support, expectations, and interventions of family and community both strengthened and complicated the lives of couples, reminding us that marriage was a deeply social institution, one that connected individuals to the wider world around them in profound and lasting ways. Our next chapter will journey into the world of medieval wedding gifts and dowries, the tangible tokens exchanged and their significance in sealing alliances and securing futures. Wedding gifts and dowries were fundamental elements of medieval marriages, serving as tangible expressions of alliance, wealth, and hope for the future. These exchanges were much more than simple presents. They were carefully negotiated transactions loaded with social, economic, and symbolic significance, reflecting the status of families and the expectations placed upon the couple. To understand the role of gifts and dowries in medieval weddings is to grasp a crucial layer of how marriages functioned within society. The dowry, typically provided by the bride's family, was the most significant of these transfers. It usually consisted of money, land, livestock, household goods, or a combination thereof, meant to support the new household and secure the bride's future. The size and nature of the dowry varied greatly depending on social class, region, and family wealth. For noble families, dowries could include vast estates, valuable jewelry, or rights to income from properties. For common folk, the dowry might be more modest, some farm animals, a supply of grain, or essential household utensils. Dowries served several crucial purposes. Practically, they provided economic security to the couple, helping to establish their household and ensure its sustainability. Socially, they acted as a guarantee of the bride's value and her family's commitment, often influencing the marriage contract and the standing of the groom's family. Legally, the dowry could become a form of protection for the bride in the event of widowhood or marital discord, with some customs allowing her to reclaim it if the marriage ended or her husband died. The giving of the dowry was a ceremonious affair, often discussed and formalized long before the wedding day. Contracts were drawn up, witnesses called, and terms clearly laid out. These agreements outlined what was to be given, how it was to be managed, and under what conditions it could be returned or transferred. The involvement of lawyers, notaries, or clergy ensured that dowry agreements were binding and respected by all parties. Alongside the dowry, the groom's family might present gifts as well, sometimes called the bride price or mourning gift, symbolizing their acceptance and support of the bride. These gifts could range from jewelry and fine clothing to land or livestock, underscoring the mutual nature of the alliance. The exchange of gifts reinforced the reciprocal obligations of the families and demonstrated goodwill. Wedding guests also contributed gifts, adding to the abundance and celebration. These could include food, household items, textiles, or money. The giving of gifts by the community helped to weave the couple more tightly into social networks, signaling acceptance and support. Many wedding gifts were deeply symbolic. For example, keys given to the bride symbolized her new role as mistress of the household, entrusted with its management and protection. Embroidered cloths or linens might bear family crests or motifs symbolizing fertility and prosperity. Such items became cherished heirlooms, passed down through generations. The management and inheritance of dowries and gifts were sources of both security and conflict. Disputes over dowry rights occasionally led to legal battles, particularly when families sought to reclaim property after a marriage ended. Widows' rights to their dowry were a critical aspect of their social and economic independence, making these issues matters of life and survival. Dowries also influenced the choices and freedoms of women. For some, a substantial dowry enhanced marriage prospects and bargaining power. For others, the pressure to produce or bring a significant dowry could be a source of anxiety or family strain. In sum, wedding gifts and dowries were essential threads in the fabric of medieval marriage, intertwining personal hopes with family strategy and community values. They transformed marriage from a private union into a social contract with tangible stakes and lasting consequences. Our next chapter will explore the significance of children and family life in medieval marriages, how offspring shaped relationships, household dynamics, and the very future of the couple. Children held a central place in medieval marriages, not only as cherished blessings, but as essential pillars sustaining family lineage, inheritance, and social stability. The arrival of offspring transformed the marriage, deepening the bonds between spouses while introducing new challenges, responsibilities, and hopes. To understand medieval family life is to appreciate the profound role children played in shaping the intimate and public aspects of married existence. From the moment a couple wed, the expectation of producing heirs, especially sons, was paramount. Sons ensured the continuation of the family name, the transmission of property, and the fulfillment of social duties. Daughters, while often seen through the lens of future marriages, were equally valued as bearers of alliances and caretakers of family honor. The birth of children was therefore celebrated with joy but also accompanied by anxiety, given the high risks associated with childbirth and infant mortality. Pregnancy was a time wrapped in rituals, care, and sometimes fear. Midwives, often women with specialized knowledge passed down through generations, played crucial roles in assisting expectant mothers. Their expertise extended beyond the physical to include spiritual protection, employing prayers, charms, and herbal remedies to safeguard mother and child. The community's attention often turned toward the couple during this period, offering support and hoping for a successful outcome. Childbirth itself was perilous. Without modern medicine, complications were common, and many women faced death or lasting injury. The birth chamber was typically a humble room, sometimes surrounded by family or midwives who provided comfort and assistance. The cries of a newborn were met with relief and thanksgiving, prayers offered swiftly, and preparations made for baptism to welcome the child into the Christian fold. Raising children required constant care and labor. From infancy, children were nurtured within a household that was both a family unit and a center of economic production. Mothers often bore the primary responsibility for feeding, cleaning, and soothing infants, while fathers prepared sons for future roles through instruction, training, and example. Siblings and extended kin frequently assisted, creating a network of caregivers essential to survival. Education varied greatly depending on social class and region. Noble children might receive formal tutoring in languages, religion, and etiquette, preparing them for leadership roles or advantageous marriages. Common children learned practical skills, farming, weaving, cooking, through daily work and apprenticeship. Both boys and girls were introduced early to the customs and responsibilities they would assume as adults. Children were also a source of joy, play, and affection, even amid the hardships of medieval life. Toys, games, and storytelling provided moments of leisure and learning. Families passed down songs, folktales, and traditions that connected generations and reinforced cultural identity. The laughter of children echoed through homes and villages, embodying hope and continuity. Yet, the death of children was a frequent and devastating reality. High infant and child mortality rates meant that many families endured profound grief, mourning children lost to illness, accidents, or malnutrition. Such losses shaped family dynamics and religious practices, with prayers, masses, and memorials dedicated to deceased offspring. The ever-present threat of loss underscored the fragility of life and the preciousness of each birth. The presence of children altered the relationship between spouses. Parenthood could deepen affection and shared purpose, but also introduce stress, financial burden, and exhaustion. The need to provide food, shelter, and education required cooperation and mutual support. At the same time, differing views on discipline, inheritance, or household management sometimes sparked tension. Inheritance customs, tied closely to the birth of children, were particularly significant. Primogeniture, the practice of passing estates to the eldest son, was common in many regions, shaping family expectations and sometimes sowing discord among siblings. Daughters' inheritances were often tied to marriage arrangements, reinforcing alliances between families. These patterns affected how parents nurtured and planned for their children's futures. Through children, medieval marriages extended beyond the couple themselves, linking past, present, and future. They embodied continuity, social order, and the very survival of communities. The joys and sorrows of family life were inseparable from the larger tapestry of medieval existence, woven with care, hope, and resilience. Our next chapter will explore the difficulties and darker sides of medieval marriages, the disputes, separations, and social challenges that tested even the strongest unions. While medieval weddings often began with celebration and hope, the reality of married life could be far more complex and fraught with difficulties. Behind the ceremonies, feasts, and rituals lay challenges that tested couples in profound ways. Disputes, separations, social pressures, and even violence cast shadows on many marriages. Exploring these darker aspects reveals the full spectrum of the medieval marriage experience, reminding us that beneath the surface of tradition and joy human struggles were very real. One common source of tension was the clash between personal desires and societal expectations. Marriages were frequently arranged for economic, political, or social reasons, leaving little room for love or compatibility. Couples who barely knew each other were thrust into lifelong partnerships, often with conflicting personalities, values, or ambitions. This mismatch sometimes bred resentment, loneliness, or frustration, feelings difficult to express in a world that prized obedience and conformity, especially for women. Conflicts over household management and authority were frequent. Patriarchal norms granted husbands significant control over family life, including decisions about property, finances, and discipline. Wives were expected to be obedient and manage the domestic sphere, but disagreements about duties or expenditures could escalate. While open arguments might have been discouraged publicly, tensions simmered behind closed doors, occasionally erupting into heated disputes. Infidelity, though dangerous to acknowledge openly, was another challenge. Men sometimes took mistresses or frequented taverns, indulging in behaviors that betrayed marital vows. For women, accusations of adultery carried severe social and legal consequences, including public shaming, physical punishment, or exile. Such betrayals could devastate families, provoke feuds, or lead to legal battles over legitimacy and inheritance. Divorce was rare and difficult to obtain, governed strictly by church law that emphasized the indissolubility of marriage. However, annulments could be granted in cases of consanguinity, impotence, or lack of consent, offering some recourse. Informal separations occurred when couples chose to live apart, but such arrangements risked social stigma and economic hardship, especially for women who depended on their husband's support. Domestic violence, while seldom documented due to social taboos and scarce records, was undoubtedly a reality for some. The power imbalance within marriages left women vulnerable to physical and emotional abuse. Yet, some communities and legal systems offered limited protections, and neighbors or clergy might intervene in extreme cases. Nonetheless, prevailing attitudes often minimized or ignored such suffering. Economic hardship strained many marriages. Failed harvests, illness, or debt could deplete resources, leading to stress and conflict over how to manage scarce provisions. The pressure to produce heirs, maintain the household, and fulfill social obligations weighed heavily, sometimes overwhelming couples and families. Social gossip and community judgment amplified these difficulties. Marriage was a public institution, subject to scrutiny and moral policing. Missteps or scandals could tarnish reputations, isolate families, or invite intervention by authorities. This surveillance reinforced conformity but also created a climate of fear and repression. Despite these challenges, many couples found ways to endure, negotiate, and even thrive. Mutual affection, shared faith, and pragmatic cooperation helped some navigate the hardships of married life. Records and letters reveal stories of forgiveness, adaptation, and partnership that balance duty with personal bonds. Understanding the darker sides of medieval marriages does not diminish their significance but enriches our comprehension of human experience across time. It reminds us that marriage has always been a complex, multifaceted institution shaped by joy and struggle alike. Our next chapter will explore the role of festivals, anniversaries, and communal celebrations in sustaining marriage and family life over the years. In the medieval world, marriage was not a single event, but a continuous journey marked by recurring festivals, anniversaries, and communal celebrations that reinforced bonds, renewed commitments, and integrated the couple into the life of their community. These occasions, ranging from annual feast days to milestone anniversaries, offered opportunities to celebrate love, honor tradition, and solidify social connections. They transformed marriage from a private contract into a living, dynamic relationship woven into the rhythms of medieval society. One of the most important recurring celebrations was the wedding anniversary, often commemorated with feasts, prayers, and gifts. While precise records are scarce, historical accounts suggest that couples and their families marked significant anniversaries, such as the first year or the 5th and 10th years, with special gatherings. These events provided moments to reflect on the journey shared, to seek blessings for continued happiness, and to reaffirm social ties. Feast days dedicated to saints, religious festivals, and agricultural cycles also played vital roles in sustaining married life. Saints associated with marriage, fertility, or family, such as Saint Valentine or Saint, and were honored with prayers and offerings, invoking protection and guidance. These holy days often coincided with communal celebrations involving church services, processions, and communal meals that brought together families and neighbors. Harvest festivals and seasonal fairs were opportunities for communities to gather, exchange goods, and enjoy entertainment. Married couples participated alongside singles, children, and elders, celebrating the bounty of the land and the continuity of life. These gatherings strengthened social cohesion, allowing families to display their prosperity and reaffirm alliances. Certain local customs and rites were closely tied to marriage and family life. For example, renewal of vows ceremonies or blessing rites might be performed at church or at home, reasserting the couple's commitment and seeking divine favor. In some regions, symbolic acts such as hand fasting, a ritual binding of hands, were revisited to mark anniversaries or to settle disputes. Communal celebrations often featured music, dance, and feasting reminiscent of the wedding day itself, evoking memories and rekindling joy. These occasions provided respite from daily labor and hardships, reinforcing the importance of leisure and festivity in medieval life. The giving and receiving of gifts continued beyond the wedding day, with tokens exchanged during anniversaries, births, or significant life events. Such gifts served as reminders of affection and obligation, linking the couple to their wider social networks. Religious institutions played ongoing roles in supporting married couples. Priests and clergy offered counsel, administered sacraments, and officiated at family milestones such as baptisms and funerals, embedding marriage within the sacred rhythms of life and death. These recurrent celebrations helped couples navigate the passage of time, transforming marriage from a singular moment into an evolving relationship nourished by shared experiences and communal recognition. They fostered resilience, joy, and a sense of belonging, crucial in a world marked by uncertainty and change. Our next chapter will examine the fascinating customs and traditions surrounding medieval wedding processions, the journeys that carried couples from their old lives into new beginnings, rich with symbolism and pageantry. Medieval wedding processions were vibrant, symbolic journeys that marked the passage from single life into marital union, serving as both public spectacle and deeply meaningful ritual. These processions were carefully choreographed events that involved not only the bride and groom but their families, friends, neighbors, and community leaders, transforming the wedding into a communal affirmation of alliance, status, and celebration. To understand medieval weddings fully, one must explore the layered significance of these moving ceremonies and the rich traditions that surrounded them. The procession typically began at the bride's family home, where guests gathered in anticipation, dressed in their finest garments. The bride, often veiled and adorned with symbolic clothing and jewelry, was accompanied by female relatives and attendants who helped prepare her for the journey. The groom awaited with his party, dressed in equally impressive attire, ready to escort the bride to the church or ceremony location. As the procession moved through village streets or castle courtyards, it became a spectacle of color, sound, and movement. Musicians played lively tunes on flutes, drums, and stringed instruments, setting a joyful pace and encouraging the crowd's participation. Banners, flags, and heraldic symbols fluttered in the breeze, representing the families involved and adding to the pageantry. Participants carried candles, crosses, or flowers, each element rich with symbolism. Candles illuminated the path, symbolizing the light of faith guiding the couple's new life. Crosses represented divine blessing, while flowers, particularly roses and myrtle, signified love, purity, and fertility. In some regions, the bride might carry a bouquet or a sprig of rosemary, believed to bring good luck and ward off evil spirits. The procession route itself was often chosen with care, passing through important community spaces such as the village green, market square, or near the local lord's manor. Along the way, well-wishers might line the streets, offering blessings, singing songs, or tossing petals and grains to invoke prosperity and fertility. The sounds of cheering, music, and laughter filled the air, making the procession a shared celebration that connected the couple with their wider world. Symbolic stops or rituals punctuated the journey. For example, the couple might pause at the home of a godparent or family elder for a blessing, or at a crossroads where prayers were offered for safe passage and a prosperous union. In some customs, the procession included a brief mock kidnapping of the bride, a playful rite symbolizing transition and testing the groom's commitment. Upon reaching the church or ceremony site, the procession culminated in a solemn entrance, with the bride and groom taking their places before the altar. This transition from public celebration to sacred ceremony underscored the dual nature of marriage as both social contract and spiritual covenant. After the ceremony, a return procession sometimes took place, bringing the newlyweds to their new home or the groom's estate. This journey was equally important, marking the bride's passage from her family to her husband's household, symbolizing change, acceptance, and new beginnings. Throughout these processions, the community's presence was a vital component. The gathering of families, friends, neighbors, and officials reinforced social bonds, publicized alliances, and celebrated continuity. The pageantry and rituals of the procession echoed ancient traditions, blending Christian symbolism with regional customs to create a rich tapestry of meaning. In some, medieval wedding processions were much more than mere movements from place to place. They were theatrical, spiritual, and communal acts that framed the marriage within the rhythms of life and society. They transformed streets and spaces into stages where the couple's new journey was both witnessed and blessed. Our next chapter will delve into the role of food and drink rituals during the wedding procession and ceremony. The tastes, toasts, and symbolic refreshments that accompanied the couple's path to matrimony. Food and drink were not merely sources of sustenance during medieval weddings. They carried profound symbolic weight and played essential roles in the rituals that accompanied the procession and ceremony. From carefully prepared refreshments shared along the route to ceremonial toasts within the church and banquet hall, these edible offerings embodied blessings of fertility, prosperity, and communal harmony, weaving together physical nourishment with spiritual and social meaning. During the wedding procession, it was customary in many regions to pause at designated homes or gathering spots where the couple and their entourage were offered sustenance. These stops, sometimes called refreshment stations, provided guests and the bride and groom with bread, cheese, fruits, and wine or ale. The sharing of food at these points symbolized hospitality and goodwill, reinforcing bonds between families and neighbors. Hosts took great pride in offering generous and high-quality fare, seeing it as an opportunity to demonstrate their wealth, status, and kindness. Special foods featured prominently at these stops. For example, sweet cakes or spiced breads might be presented, their aromatic flavors evoking wishes for sweetness and joy in the couple's married life. Honey, prized both for its taste and its symbolic connotations of fertility and health, was often incorporated into breads, mead, or confections. Nuts and dried fruits, sometimes sugared, represented abundance and the hope for a fruitful union. The act of sharing drink, whether wine, mead, or ale, was equally significant. Cups were raised in toasts to the bride and groom's health and happiness, with toasts often accompanied by blessings or rhymes. Drinking together reinforced communal ties and marked moments of joy and solemnity. The custom of the wedding cup, a special vessel passed among guests to share a drink, exemplified this collective participation in the marriage celebration. Within the church, food and drink played more subtle but no less meaningful roles. While the consumption of physical food during the ceremony was rare, the Eucharist, the sharing of bread and wine as the body and blood of Christ, imbued the wedding with spiritual nourishment and divine blessing. This sacrament was central to the religious understanding of marriage as a holy covenant, reinforcing the sacredness of the union. Following the ceremony, the wedding feast became the focal point for the most elaborate food and drink rituals. The banquet featured multiple courses showcasing the best available ingredients, often arranged to symbolize abundance, fertility, and prosperity. Roasted meats, fresh fruits, sweet confections, and fine wines delighted the palate, while the presentation itself became a performance of generosity and status. Certain dishes and drinks held special ceremonial importance. The bridal cake, sometimes a dense spiced loaf or a stack of sweet pastries, was broken over the bride's head or shared among guests to bestow fertility and good luck. The wassail, a spiced warm drink served during the feast, encouraged merriment and goodwill. Toasts continued throughout the banquet, punctuating the meal with expressions of hope and celebration. Food also served as a form of communication, with particular ingredients or preparations conveying messages. Spices, rare and costly, signaled wealth and hospitality. The inclusion of specific fruits or herbs invoked symbolic meanings rooted in medieval lore. Sharing food with guests reinforced the idea of marriage as a communal affair, binding the couple into a network of relationships sustained by generosity and reciprocity. In sum, food and drink rituals during the wedding procession and ceremony were multifaceted acts that nourished body and spirit alike. They blended practical hospitality with deep symbolism, transforming each bite and sip into a gesture of blessing, connection, and celebration. Our next chapter will explore the fascinating role of medieval wedding music and song, how melodies and lyrics accompanied the couple's journey and enlivened their celebrations. Music and song were the vibrant threads weaving through every moment of medieval weddings, infusing the ceremonies and celebrations with emotion, meaning, and communal spirit. From the solemn chants echoing in stone churches to the lively tunes inspiring dance and merriment at the feast, melodies shaped the atmosphere and helped narrate the story of the bride and groom's journey. Understanding the role of music illuminates how sound was a vital partner to ritual and festivity, engaging all senses in the tapestry of marriage. The musical backdrop began long before the ceremony, with minstrels and musicians playing at the bride's home as guests gathered and preparations unfolded. Their melodies signaled joy and anticipation, lifting spirits and encouraging social interaction. Instruments such as lutes, fiddles, flutes, and drums filled rooms and courtyards with lively rhythms and harmonious tunes. Some songs were traditional wedding pieces, passed down through generations, while others were improvised or composed for the occasion. During the procession to the church, music marked the couple's passage through the community. Trumpets and shawms called attention, while flutes and harps provided softer harmonies. The sounds energized the crowd, invited participation, and underscored the significance of the moment. Banners and costumes added visual splendor, but it was the music that wove the procession into a moving celebration. Inside the church, music shifted to a more solemn and sacred tone. Gregorian chants and hymns filled the vaulted spaces, underscoring the spiritual gravity of the marriage vows. The choir's voices, sometimes accompanied by simple instrumental tones, elevated the ceremony into a profound experience, connecting the couple's union to divine blessing and eternal love. Certain hymns or psalms were selected for their symbolic content, reinforcing themes of fidelity, grace, and hope. Following the ceremony, the mood brightened as music transformed the wedding feast into a jubilant celebration. Dance tunes burst forth, inviting guests of all ages to join in communal revelry. Dances like the brannel, pavane, or lively reels encouraged movement, laughter, and connection. Musicians might perform solo or ensemble pieces, while singers entertained with ballads recounting tales of love, heroism, or humorous anecdotes, adding layers of narrative and amusement. Songs often included references to the bride and groom, praising their virtues or playfully teasing them, creating a sense of intimacy and inclusion. The call and response style of some pieces invited guests to join in chorus, turning the feast into a shared musical experience that bonded the community. Music also accompanied specific rituals and moments during the feast, such as the cutting of the bridal cake, the exchange of toasts, or the ceremonial handing over of the keys to the bride, marking her new role. These musical cues helped structure the event, signaling transitions and emphasizing key symbolic acts. In many regions, local folk songs and melodies were incorporated, reflecting the cultural identity and traditions of the community. These pieces preserved heritage and connected the wedding to broader social histories, ensuring that each celebration was unique yet rooted in collective memory. Ultimately, music and song at medieval weddings were not mere entertainment but vital expressions of joy, spirituality, and social cohesion. They animated the day's events, engaged participants emotionally, and created lasting memories that echoed long after the last note faded. Our next chapter will explore the fascinating roles of animals and nature symbolism in medieval wedding rituals, the creatures and natural elements that carried deeper meanings for couples and communities. Animals and elements of nature played a surprisingly significant and symbolic role in medieval weddings, reflecting the era's deep connection to the natural world and its pervasive influence on cultural rituals. From the birds that accompanied processions to the flowers and greenery woven into attire and decor, these living symbols carried meanings of fertility, purity, strength, and prosperity, infusing the marriage ceremony with layers of ancient tradition and spiritual resonance. Birds were among the most potent natural symbols in wedding rites. Doves, in particular, represented peace, love, and fidelity. Their gentle cooing evoked the hope for a harmonious and lasting union. It was not uncommon for doves to be released during the ceremony or celebration, symbolizing the souls of the bride and groom soaring together toward a blessed future. Swans, associated with grace and lifelong partnership, were also admired, while songbirds filled the air with melodies that enlivened the festivities. Other animals featured prominently in wedding symbolism. Rabbits and hares, known for their prolific breeding, were emblematic of fertility and abundance. Sometimes figurines or images of these creatures were incorporated into decorations or gifts to convey wishes for many children and prosperity. Deer, symbolizing gentleness and purity, and lions, representing courage and strength, might appear in heraldic displays or ceremonial attire, linking the couple to noble qualities. Nature's bounty was vividly expressed through the use of flowers, greenery, and plants throughout the wedding. Floral garlands and wreaths adorned the bride's hair, the church, and the feast hall, often including roses for love, myrtle for fidelity, and ivy for eternity. These living decorations were not only beautiful but served as talismans to bless the marriage with health and growth. Herbs such as rosemary and lavender were common, their fragrances believed to ward off evil spirits and bring clarity and calm. Sprigs of these herbs might be tied to the bride's bouquet or scattered along the procession route, blending sensory experience with spiritual protection. The incorporation of trees and wood was also symbolic. In some traditions, the couple would plant a tree together, signifying their joint growth and rootedness in the community. Wooden tokens or carvings given as gifts symbolized strength and endurance, qualities essential for the trials of married life. Water, a fundamental element of nature, appeared in purification rituals. The sprinkling of holy water or the passage through streams symbolized cleansing and renewal, washing away past burdens and preparing the couple for a fresh start. This motif of purification was central to many rites and underscored the sacredness of the marital bond. Even the time of year influenced the natural symbolism embedded in weddings. Spring weddings aligned with themes of rebirth and fertility, incorporating blossoms and young animals, while autumn ceremonies highlighted harvest and abundance, featuring fruits and grains. Animals were sometimes present in more tangible ways. Horses often carried the bride or groom in processions, their strength and nobility amplifying the grandeur of the event. Dogs, valued for loyalty and protection, might accompany the couple or guests, symbolizing faithfulness. Together, these animals and natural elements created a rich tapestry of meaning, connecting the human experience of marriage to the cycles and mysteries of the natural world. They reminded participants of the continuity between human life and the greater rhythms of creation, embedding the wedding within a sacred ecology of symbols and stories. Our next chapter will journey into the fascinating world of medieval wedding attire for guests and attendants, how those who surrounded the couple dressed to honor the occasion and express their place in the social fabric. In medieval weddings, the attire of guests and attendants was a vital aspect of the celebration, revealing much about social status, local customs, and the importance of the occasion. Far from being mere spectators, those who surrounded the bride and groom participated actively through their dress, signaling respect, allegiance, and sometimes subtle rivalry. The careful selection of garments, colors, and accessories transformed the wedding gathering into a vibrant display of community identity and hierarchy. The bridal party, often called the attendants or bridal train, played a central role in the ceremony and feast, their clothing chosen to complement and highlight the bride's attire while adhering to social conventions. Bridesmaids, groomsmen, and other close relatives wore richly decorated garments that reflected their family's wealth and prestige, often in coordinated colors or styles to symbolize unity. Women's wedding attire varied according to class and region but typically featured long, flowing gowns made from fine fabrics such as silk, velvet, or richly dyed wool. Embroidery and embellishments, such as pearls, gold thread, and intricate patterns, added layers of luxury and symbolism. Headwear ranged from simple veils to elaborate hennins, pointed headdresses, or circlets, often adorned with jewels or ribbons. Men's clothing included doublets, hose, and cloaks, crafted from luxurious materials and brightly colored dyes. Tunics embroidered with family crests or badges signaled lineage and allegiance. Hats or caps, sometimes decorated with feathers or jewels, completed the ensemble, while belts and purses added functional elegance. Colors held special significance. Blue and white were often associated with purity and fidelity, while red symbolized passion and vitality. Green represented fertility and renewal, and gold or purple denoted wealth and nobility. Wearing the right colors was essential for conveying messages about one's social position and intentions. Guests who were commoners or lower status adapted their attire to the occasion, wearing their best garments and adding small decorative touches to show respect. In some villages, entire communities coordinated colors or styles for weddings, enhancing the sense of collective celebration. Accessories played important roles in completing wedding attire. Jewelry, rings, brooches, necklaces was not only decorative but often carried symbolic meanings related to love, loyalty, or protection. Gloves, embroidered handkerchiefs, and ornate belts added subtle flourishes, while the careful choice of footwear reflected status and practicality. In addition to personal adornment, attendants carried items that contributed to the ceremony, such as candles, bouquets, or ceremonial swords, further emphasizing their active roles. The way they dressed and behaved reinforced social order, underscoring the importance of hierarchy and tradition. The presentation of the bridal party at the wedding was a theatrical moment, showcasing not only the couple, but the interconnected web of families and communities that supported them. Their clothing visually narrated stories of lineage, alliance, and identity, making the wedding a moving pageant of medieval life. Understanding wedding attire for guests and attendants offers insight into the social dynamics of the time, revealing how dress communicated values, relationships, and aspirations within the festive context. Our next chapter will examine the customs and rituals surrounding the wedding night and the consummation of marriage, moments shrouded in privacy but charged with social and symbolic importance.